Hey there, tonight we're diving into the cozy yet complex world of a Victorian family Christmas, where the truth is, those quaint traditions weren't just about jingling bells, but a response to rapid social change and industrial innovation. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. If you were to rewind the clock to the Victorian era, you'd find Christmas undergoing a transformation more dramatic than a reality show makeover. We're talking about a time when Christmas wasn't just about decking the halls, but about constructing the halls in the first place. And who do we have to thank for this festive facelift? Well, it wasn't exactly Santa Claus swooping in with a bag full of traditions. Nope, it was more like Charles Dickens, a royal German import, and a cultural shift that turned a religious festival into a consumerist carnival. First up, Charles Dickens. Now, you might think of A Christmas Carol as that heartwarming tale where Ebenezer Scrooge goes from miser to merry, but in 1843 it was a marketing masterstroke. Dickens didn't just write a novel, he scripted a cultural phenomenon. Story played on the heartstrings of the public with the same precision as a virtuoso violinist. With Tiny Tim tugging at the collective Victorian heart, Dickens sold over 6,000 copies in just a few days. He effectively rebranded Christmas from a sleepy religious observance into a time of charity, compassion, and let's be honest, a bit of commercialism. But it wasn't just Dickens waving his literary wand. Enter Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, the ultimate power couple of PR. Before their regal intervention, Christmas trees were about as British as lederhosen. It was Albert, Victoria's German husband, who introduced the Christmas tree to the British court in the 1840. You might think of this as a simple act of cultural exchange, but this was more like a social media campaign gone viral. The Illustrated London News ran a sketch of the royal family gathered around their tree in 1848, and suddenly everyone wanted a slice of this evergreen pie. The Christmas tree became more than just a piece of furniture. It was a symbol of domestic bliss and royal approval. And let's not gloss over the fact that this festive overhaul came with a price tag. This wasn't a budget-friendly affair. Christmas trees, ornaments, and all the trimmings had to be imported, often at substantial cost. A well-decorated Christmas tree could set you back a few pounds, a time when the average worker's weekly wage hovered around £1. The Victorians weren't exactly clipping coupons to celebrate the season. This was a time when the spirit of giving was intertwined with the spirit of spending. Now, you might wonder why the Victorians were so eager to embrace these new traditions. The answer lies in the broader social changes of the era. With the Industrial Revolution in full swing, urbanization was reshaping society. People were flocking to cities, leaving behind rural communities where folk traditions had been the norm. In this new urban environment, there was a hunger for new customs that could bring a sense of unity and identity. Christmas, with its emphasis on family and home, fit the bill perfectly. Yet, beneath the tinsel and the turkey lies a more complex picture. The Victorian Christmas was as much about social inequality as it was about festive cheer. While the wealthy could afford lavish celebrations, the poor often struggled to keep up. Dickens' portrayal of the Cratchit family wasn't just a convenient plot device. It was a reflection of the harsh realities many faced. The charitable aspect of Christmas, popularized by Dickens, was not merely a moral narrative, but a necessary rallying cry in a time of stark economic disparity. So, as you sip your eggnog and hang your baubles, remember that the Victorian Christmas was a concoction of literature, royalty, and economic forces. It was a time when the Christmas spirit was meticulously crafted, with a nod to the past and an eye on the future. Dickens, Victoria, and Albert didn't just give us a holiday, they gave us a legacy, a reminder that even the most cherished traditions are often born out of necessity and innovation. As the Victorian era rolled on, the Christmas dinner table became the centerpiece of the holiday, a culinary stage where geese and puddings played leading roles. Forget the modern fantasy of a turkey centerpiece, all golden and Instagram-ready. In the Victorian playbook, goose took the starring role, and it wasn't just for aesthetic reasons. Goose was the bird of choice because it was cheaper than turkey, but still substantial enough to feed a family. In fact, during the 1860s, a good-sized goose might set you back about 5 shillings. Compare that to a turkey, which could cost double, and suddenly Ebenezer Scrooge's frugality starts to look less like stinginess and more like financial savvy. But the logistics of procuring a Christmas goose were no walk in the park. First, you had to navigate the bustling, often chaotic local markets, where the holiday spirit was more like a rugby scrum than a peaceful stroll. Imagine elbowing your way through a maze of stalls, each boasting an array of meats, with butchers shouting their prices over the din. And let's not forget, this was a time before refrigeration. Your goose wasn't just a meal, it was a ticking time bomb of freshness. Once secured, the bird had to be cooked, and here's where things really got interesting. Houses in the Victorian era weren't exactly equipped with the latest kitchen gadgets. Roasting a goose involved a labor-intensive dance with coal fires and spit roasts, a process that demanded patience and skill. You didn't just pop it in the oven and set a timer. It was an all-day affair, with someone, often a servant or the lady of the house, tending to the fire, basting the bird, and hoping it wouldn't all end in a charred disaster. And what's a goose without the trimmings? Enter the Christmas pudding, a dense concoction of suet, flour, sugar, and dried fruits, all bound together with a liberal splash of brandy. If you think today's fruitcake gets a bad rap, consider that Victorian puddings were so heavy they could double as paperweights. These puddings were often made weeks in advance, giving time for the brandy to fully infiltrate every raisin and currant. But this wasn't just about flavor. It was an act of preservation. Remember, this was an era before preservatives, so the alcohol wasn't just for fun. It was a form of culinary insurance. Speaking of insurance, let's talk economics. The average Victorian middle-class family might spend up to a quarter of their annual income on Christmas festivities. Think about that for a second. If your salary is, say, $50,000 a year today, that's like dropping $12,500 on one holiday. And for what? To impress the neighbors, uphold social standing, and perhaps most importantly, to not be outdone by the Joneses. Because yes, keeping up with them was a thing even back then. For working-class families, this meant scrimping and saving, often going into debt, just to afford what was deemed a respectable Christmas. So, while Dickens' portrayal of a generous Christmas might warm our hearts, the reality was a bit chillier. Many families, eager to emulate the festive splendor depicted in literature and royal portraits, found themselves financially overextended. This wasn't just about buying a few extra gifts. It was a full-scale economic operation. If you've ever wondered why Scrooge was so tight-fisted, consider that Dickens was tapping into a genuine anxiety of the time. Financial prudence wasn't just a personality quirk. It was a survival strategy. Yet, despite the economic strain, the allure of a lavish Christmas was hard to resist. The Victorians were caught up in a whirlwind of social change, and Christmas became a touchstone of continuity and comfort. The Industrial Revolution had upended traditional lifestyles, with families moving from rural areas to burgeoning cities. In this new urban landscape, Christmas offered a moment of pause, a chance to reconnect with family and tradition amidst the chaos of modern life. So, as the pudding steamed and the goose roasted, the Victorian Christmas dinner was more than just a meal. It was a reflection of the era's social and economic complexities. It was a balancing act between aspiration and reality, tradition and innovation. In the end, the Victorian Christmas was a testament to human nature's enduring desire for connection, identity, and yes, a little bit of indulgence, even if it meant stretching the purse strings to the breaking point. As we continue our journey through this festive transformation, keep in mind that the next chapter involves not just what we ate, but how we entertained ourselves and each other during this most wonderful and expensive time of the year. As the steam from the pudding billowed and the goose monopolized the hearth, the idea of a Victorian Christmas was evolving beyond the dinner table into something even more whimsical. Enter the toys. Now, before you imagine a quaint scene of rosy-cheeked children tearing into perfectly wrapped presents, let's rewind a bit to the days when toys were as handmade as Grandma's quilt. Back then, a wooden doll or a hand-sewn rag bear was the height of luxury, crafted with care and creativity. but also a hefty pinch of parental elbow grease. But then, like an overzealous uncle at a family gathering, the Industrial Revolution barged in with big ideas and even bigger machinery. Suddenly, toys were being churned out faster than you could say, assembly line, and Christmas morning went from a few modest gifts to a veritable toy bonanza. It was as if Santa had traded his sleigh for a steam engine. You see, the 19th century's industrial advancements didn't just keep the factories humming, they revolutionized the way gifts were given. The introduction of mass production meant toys could be made quickly, efficiently, and most importantly for the Victorians, cheaply. By the 1850, toy factories were pumping out goods like clockwork, literally. Tin soldiers, model trains, and dolls with eyes that blinked were the hot items, selling for mere pennies. But let's not get too swept up in the romance of it all. Behind the curtain of this toyland wonder was a grim reality. The same industrial prowess that filled stockings also filled factories with young laborers, not in a bring your child to work kind of way. We're talking about child labor, where tiny hands worked long hours in grimy conditions, assembling the very toys that other kids would unwrap on Christmas morning. Charles Dickens wasn't writing fiction when he highlighted the plight of the poor. It was an all-too-common reality. By 1833, laws like the Factory Act attempted to limit the workday for children to a mere 12 hours, but enforcement was about as effective as a chocolate teapot. So, while little Johnny might have been thrilled with his new tin soldier, the irony was thicker than a Victorian gravy. The very hands that assembled his toy were often those of a child his own age, toiling away in a factory somewhere. And let's not gloss over the economic disparity here. While the burgeoning middle class could indulge in these new festive excesses, the working class often found themselves on the outside looking in, with their children sometimes spending more time making toys than playing with them. Still, the lure of a toy-filled Christmas was irresistible. The Victorians were caught in the gleam of shiny new things, and who could blame them? For families who'd spent generations with little more than a few oranges or a homemade trinket at Christmas, the idea of a plethora of gifts was as intoxicating as it was novel. By the 1870, the Christmas catalogue became a staple, full of vivid illustrations and enticing descriptions, a precursor to the modern wish list. It was capitalism's gift to the holiday season, a paper portal to a world of possibilities that promised joy at the turn of a page. And then there was the marketing genius of the toy industry. Manufacturers weren't just selling toys, they were selling dreams. Ads depicted idyllic scenes of children playing in beautifully decorated rooms, all smiles and sunshine, a stark contrast to the soot-stained reality faced by many. It was an aspirational image that spoke to the Victorian mindset, a desire for progress, prosperity, and a perfect family image. Of course, this festive transformation was more than just a commercial venture. It was also a reflection of the era's social dynamics. As Britain moved into the latter half of the century, the middle class was expanding, and with it came a shift in family dynamics. Where once children were seen as miniature adults, expected to contribute to the household, they were now viewed as beings worthy of leisure and indulgence. Toys weren't just playthings, they were symbols of this new understanding of childhood. They were an acknowledgement that kids needed and deserved some fun. But not all toys were created equal. While mass production made toys more accessible, it also meant that quality could sometimes take a backseat to quantity. Sure, you might score a whole set of tin soldiers, but they might lose a limb or two in the heat of battle. Such was the trade-off for bulk buying in the Victorian era. And let's not even get started on safety standards. Lead paint and sharp edges were as common as Aunt Edna's fruitcake, but at least the latter didn't pose a choking hazard. As the century drew to a close, the toy industry was a juggernaut, a testament to the era's spirit of innovation and indulgence. The Victorian Christmas had become a carefully curated spectacle of joy and generosity, a reflection of the societal shifts that had taken place over the decades. It was a time when the spirit of giving was as much about the latest trends as it was about heartfelt gestures. And so, as we leave this chapter of Victorian Christmas behind, remember that each toy told a story of progress, of social change, and of the complex tapestry that was Victorian life. It was a time when the magic of Christmas morning came wrapped in both dreams and realities, a reminder that even the most enchanting tales often have a more complicated subtext. So, stay tuned, because the Victorian saga is far from over, and there are more tales to tell and myths to bust in the chapters ahead. And speaking of tales with complicated subtexts, let's dive headlong into the Yuletide paradox of Victorian charity. You see, Christmas wasn't just a time for lavish feasts and extravagant gifts. It was also the season for showcasing one's moral fiber, or at least that's what the upper crust wanted you to think. In reality, this grand display of generosity often glossed over some less than jolly truths. Now, let's get one thing straight. Victorian charities weren't your run-of-the-mill bake sale fundraisers. We're talking about an entire ecosystem of philanthropy that ranged from soup kitchens to orphanages, all operating under the banner of benevolence. But here's the kicker. This surge in charitable activity wasn't purely altruistic. There was more than a sprinkle of self-interest mixed in with that holiday cheer. Philanthropy became a way for the wealthy to both assuage their guilt and maintain their societal standing. Imagine a world where your reputation wasn't just about what you wore or who you knew, but also how much you gave. Suddenly, charity wasn't just an act of kindness, it was a public performance. Take the case of the Salvation Army, founded in 1865 by William Booth. This organization became the poster child for Victorian charity, with its brass bands and soup kitchens serving the undeserving poor. The Army's approach was a blend of spiritual salvation and practical aid. While they were busy dishing out heart meals, they were also fervently preaching about the virtues of sobriety and hard work. It was a moral makeover with a side of soup. Yet, even as they did good, the Salvation Army couldn't escape criticism. Some accused them of being too evangelical, while others squabbled over their methods. But love them or loathe them, by the end of the century, the Salvation Army had become a fixture of the Christmas landscape, their red kettles jingling with donations in cities across the globe. Of course, the Salvation Army wasn't alone in this festive foray into philanthropy. The Ragged Schools, started by John Pounds in the early 19th century, aimed to educate the poorest children, giving them a shot at a better life. By 1870, there were nearly 300 of these schools scattered across Britain. The idea was simple. Teach kids the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and maybe, just maybe, they'd claw their way out of poverty. But let's not sugarcoat it. These schools were often underfunded, understaffed, and overwhelmed. Despite their noble intentions, they were more of a band-aid than a cure for systemic inequality. And let's not forget the almighty charitable ball, an event where the rich and powerful donned their finest attire for an evening of dancing and donations. It was the social event of the season, where your ticket bought you both a night of entertainment and a veneer of virtue. But behind the twinkling chandeliers and clinking glasses, there was a more cynical reality. The funds raised at these soirees often went towards causes that were trendy rather than truly transformative. It was philanthropy as fashion statement, where the rich could flaunt their generosity without rocking the societal boat. Now, you might be wondering, was all this charity really making a difference? Well, yes and no. While the Victorian era undoubtedly saw an expansion in charitable activities, the root causes of poverty remained largely unaddressed. Much of the aid was paternalistic, offering temporary relief without tackling the deeper issues like wage exploitation and lack of workers' rights. It was a classic case of treating the symptoms, not the disease. Speaking of exploitation, let's turn our gaze to the Victorian workplace. You see, the era's famed industrial growth wasn't fueled by fairy dust and good intentions. It was propped up by a workforce that was often overworked, underpaid and overlooked. The same factories that churned out toys and trinkets for Christmas morning were also notorious for their grueling conditions. In 1847, the 10 Hours Act attempted to limit the workday for women and children in factories, but loopholes were as numerous as mince pies at a Christmas feast. Employers found creative ways to skirt the regulations, ensuring that the wheels of industry kept turning, often at the expense of their workers' well-being. But here's where things get a bit twisted. The same industrialists who squeezed every last drop of labor from their employees were also the ones funding many of the charitable initiatives. It was a bizarre cycle of exploitation and redemption, where being generous sometimes meant simply exploiting workers just a little less. While Ebenezer Scrooge might have eventually softened his stance towards his employees, many real-life Victorian employers were slow to follow suit. Yet despite these complexities, the spirit of Christmas charity endured, and for many it was a genuine expression of goodwill. The Victorians, with all their contradictions, were trying to navigate a rapidly changing world, and charity was one way of grappling with the social upheavals of the time. They were caught between the iron grip of tradition and the tantalizing promise of progress, and in that tension, Christmas emerged as a season of both reflection and reform. So, as we wrap up this chapter of our Victorian Christmas saga, let's not forget that the holiday was as much about giving as it was about grappling with the era's social inequalities. It was a time when the wealthy faced increasing pressure to give back, even if their motives weren't always pure. And for those on the receiving end, charity was both a lifeline and a reminder of their precarious position in society. As we look forward to more Yuletide revelations, remember that this festive season was not just about what was under the tree, but also about what was happening outside the front door. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover in the next chapter of this Victorian tapestry, where we'll continue to explore the multifaceted legacy of Christmas in an age of change. And with that, let's take a peek behind the Victorian Christmas curtain, where nostalgia often paints a scene far more picturesque than reality ever was. It's a bit like filtering your social media snaps to perfection, but for the 19th century. The Victorian Christmas, as we've romanticized it, is a tale of roaring fires, twinkling lights, and jolly gatherings. But before we get too cozy by this fictional fireside, let's shake the snow globe and see what really settled at the bottom. First, there's the myth of the traditional Christmas. Victorian Christmas enthusiasts might envision a seamless transition from a medieval Yuletide to today's Santa Claus extravaganza. But the reality was more of a bumpy ride filled with cultural potholes. Remember, many of our so-called timeless traditions were actually Victorian inventions, or reinventions, if we're being generous. Take caroling, for instance. While the Victorians did love a good sing-along, the idea that our favorite Christmas carols were all born around a Dickensian piano is about as accurate as seeing reindeer in Trafalgar Square. Jingle Bells, for instance, wasn't even a Christmas song. It was a ditty for Thanksgiving, penned by James Lord Pierpont in 1857. Talk about being in the wrong holiday movie. And speaking of cinematic moments, the Victorian Christmas card was another crafty concoction. First one was commissioned in 1843 by Sir Henry Cole. Yes, the very same year Dickens was busy unchaining Scrooge's heart. Cole's card was a marvel of efficiency, featuring a family raising a glass, surrounded by scenes of charitable acts. It was a product of its time, a commercial venture wrapped in festive cheer, much like the gift shops we stroll through today. By 1880, the British Post Office was delivering 5 million Christmas cards annually. That's a lot of Dear Aunt Mildred notes clogging up the mail. Now, let's drill down to the economic engine beneath this festive facade. The Victorians weren't just decking their halls. They were laying the groundwork for the retail frenzy we know as the holiday season. Think of it as Black Friday with more horse-drawn carriages. The rise of department stores was a game-changer. By the late 1800, establishments like Harrods and Selfridges were first on the Christmas shopping list. These emporiums offered more than just goods. They provided an experience, a spectacle, complete with elaborate window displays and in-store Santas. It was retail theater, a shopping spree with a side of spectacle, and a precursor to today's consumer carnival. And speaking of Santas, let's address the jolly elephant in the room. Santa Claus, as we imagine him, is a patchwork of cultural influences. The Victorian Santa was a blend of St. Nicholas, Father Christmas, and a dash of marketing wizardry. It wasn't until the late 1800 that his red-suited, white-bearded image solidified, thanks in no small part to the 1823 poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas. You know, 'twas the night before Christmas. But even this poem is an American import, showing that Victorian Christmas was as much about cultural exchange as it was about roasting chestnuts. Let's also not forget the role of food in perpetuating the Victorian Christmas myth. We've already touched on the goose vs. turkey debate, but let's talk pudding. This dense, alcohol-laden dessert wasn't just a treat, it was tradition, and making it was a family affair. Stir-up Sunday, the last Sunday before Advent, was when families gathered to prepare the pudding, each member taking a turn to stir for good luck. Yet, as charming as this sounds, the reality was a lot messier. Ingredients were expensive, and the process was labor-intensive. It was less about a hallmark moment and more about household management. The Victorian era also set the stage for our modern gift-giving frenzy. Before Victoria and her crew, gift-giving was largely reserved for New Year's celebrations. But as Christmas gained prominence, so did the exchange of presents. This wasn't just about spreading joy, it was a full-scale economic operation. By the late 19th century, Christmas shopping lists were as long as a Dickens novel, with the middle class eager to keep up with the Joneses, or rather, the Cratchits. The commercialization of Christmas was in full swing, and the holiday spirit came neatly packaged in boxes and bows. Now, let's turn our skeptical spotlight on that most enduring of Christmas tales, A Christmas Carol. Ah, Scrooge, the poster child for holiday redemption. On the surface, he's the ultimate villain-turned-hero, but dig a little deeper and you'll find shades of grey that would rival any London fog. Scrooge's frugality, initially painted as miserly, becomes more understandable when you consider the economic uncertainties of the time. The Industrial Revolution was a double-edged sword, offering progress but also upheaval. For many Victorians, Scrooge's penny-pinching was a relatable survival strategy, not just a character flaw. So, was Scrooge really the bad guy? Or was he simply a man out of sync with the social expectations of his day? Dickens, with his knack for social commentary, was less about vilifying Scrooge and more about spotlighting the societal pressures that shaped him. In a world where charitable giving was both a moral duty and a public performance, Scrooge's initial reluctance isn't entirely villainous. It's human. And when he finally embraces the spirit of Christmas, it's not just about opening his wallet. It's about opening his heart to the community around him. As we wrap up this Yuletide journey through Victorian history, let's remember that the legacy of this era is as complex as a Christmas pudding recipe. Victorians gave us many of the traditions we hold dear, but they also laid the groundwork for the consumer-driven holiday we know today. It's a legacy that's both enchanting and cautionary, reminding us that the magic of Christmas is often crafted as much by necessity as by nostalgia. So, next time you're sipping eggnog by the fairy lights, spare a thought for the Victorians who were just trying to make sense of a rapidly changing world. They were pioneers of the festive season, blending old customs with new innovations, and in doing so, they created a holiday that's both timeless and ever-evolving. And as for Scrooge, maybe he's just the reminder we need that the true spirit of Christmas isn't found in the size of the gift or the grandeur of the feast. It's in the connections we forge and the kindness we extend, both then and now. In the annals of history, few familial squabbles have had the far-reaching consequences of the Abbasid rise to power. This particular soap opera of bloodlines and betrayal kicked off in 750 CE, and it was anything but a quiet family dinner gone wrong. We're talking about the Abbasid Caliphate, a dynasty that didn't just knock on the door of power, but kicked it down with a sledgehammer, leaving the Umayyad house in disarray. Now, if you're thinking this was just another dusty episode of Game of Thrones, think again. This was real life, with real stakes, and a lot less dragon CGI. The Umayyads had been the big shots of the Islamic world, ruling with a firm grip from Damascus since 661 CE. But by the time the 8th century rolled around, their empire was looking more like a house of cards, teetering in a windstorm. Internal dissent, economic woes, and the ever-popular pastime of tax evasion were rampant. The Umayyads were trying to juggle a multi-ethnic, sprawling empire stretching from Spain to the edges of India, and spoiler alert, they were dropping balls left and right. Enter the Abbasids, stage left. They had a few clever tricks up their sleeves, not least of which was a killer PR campaign. The Abbasids marketed themselves as the champions of the underrepresented non-Arab Muslims, Persians, Berbers, and others who were tired of playing second fiddle to the Arab aristocracy. They also claimed descent from Muhammad's uncle, Abbas, which wasn't just a genealogical flex, but a political masterstroke. In an era where bloodlines were as good as gold, this connection gave them serious street cred. Let's not sugarcoat it. The Abbasids were savvy operators. They orchestrated their revolution with precision, leveraging widespread dissatisfaction to rally a coalition of diverse supporters. Their leader, Abu al-Abbas al-Safa, wasn't known as the bloodshedder for nothing. And while you might not want to invite him to a peaceful protest, his ruthlessness was undeniably effective. In 750 C, at the fateful Battle of the Zab, the Abbasids delivered a knockout punch to the Umayyads, effectively ending their reign. It was a textbook example of how to upend an empire with strategic alliances and a well-timed military offensive. But the Abbasids didn't just stroll into power because they were the popular kids. They had to navigate a political labyrinth just as twisted as any modern election cycle. The Umayyads had left behind a legacy of centralized autocracy, which the Abbasids had to dismantle. They shifted the focus back to Baghdad in 762 CE, effectively moving the political heart of the Islamic world and setting the stage for a cultural and intellectual renaissance. Think of it as swapping out the dull corporate boardroom for a vibrant startup hub. Economically, the Abbasids had a lot on their plate. They inherited a system plagued by inefficiencies, and it was up to them to stabilize the ship. Under their rule, trade flourished, with the Silk Road acting as the ancient world's internet, connecting the Islamic world with China, India, and beyond. This wasn't just some quaint bazaar with a few camels. It was a bustling network that made Baghdad the New York City of its time, a melting pot of ideas, goods, and people. The Abbasids introduced new agricultural techniques, such as the Qanat irrigation system, allowing them to cultivate previously barren lands. This agricultural boom helped support a burgeoning population and a thriving economy. Politically, the Abbasid Caliphate was a masterclass in balance, more than just a seesaw act between various power factions. They played the long game, fostering a decentralized governance structure that allowed local dynasties a degree of autonomy. This was less about being benevolent rulers and more a case of pragmatism. They knew that tight control over such a vast territory was a fool's errand, so they opted for a more flexible approach, keeping the peace and filling their coffers with tribute. In the realm of myth-busting, let's tackle the notion that the Abbasids were all about peace and love. Sure, they presided over the golden age of Islam, a period of unprecedented cultural and scientific achievements. But they weren't above playing dirty when it suited them. They used the Hashemiyya movement, a religious political faction, to undermine the Umayyads, only to let us sideline them once power was secured. There's a lesson here. In politics, today's ally can be tomorrow's footnote. The Abbasids didn't just stumble into success on the coattails of destiny. They crafted their narrative carefully, portraying themselves as rightful rulers in a divinely sanctioned order. They understood the power of symbolism and ceremony, using the Friday sermon or khutbah to reinforce their legitimacy. It was like a weekly press release, but with a lot more gravitas and less room for questions. To cap it all off, the Abbasids were not just power-hungry. They were visionaries with a knack for reinvention. By the end of the 8th century, they had transformed the Islamic world into a center of learning and innovation. They established the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, a beacon for scholars from all over the known world, where Greek, Persian, and Indian texts were translated into Arabic. The Abbasid rise wasn't just a change of management, it was a seismic shift that reverberated through history. They took a fragmented empire and turned it into a cultural powerhouse, setting the stage for centuries of intellectual and artistic flourishing. But make no mistake, this wasn't just a fairy tale of good triumphing over evil. There were no heroes or villains, just shrewd players who knew how to twist the game in their favor. As we delve deeper into the Abbasid story, remember, history is never just black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of human ambition, cunning, and occasionally brilliance. And so, the Abbasids have set the stage for what history books like to call the Golden Age of Islam. Cue the trumpets and gold confetti. But let's not get carried away just yet. This period wasn't all sunshine and scholarly rainbows. It was a complex tapestry woven with threads of innovation, power struggles, and of course, a dash of intrigue. Baghdad in the 8th and 9th centuries wasn't just any city. Oh no, it was the city. The New York of its time, minus the yellow cabs and skyscrapers. Instead, it had bustling bazaars, towering mosques, and a cosmopolitan vibe that would make any modern metropolis jealous. Founded in 762 CE by the Caliph al-Mansur, Baghdad was designed with such precision that it could have given urban planners today a run for their money. Picture this: a perfectly circular city, divided into 4 quadrants by 2 major roads, centered around the Caliph's palace. It was like Sim City, but for medieval caliphs, and it was spectacular. The architecture wasn't just for show. Baghdad became an intellectual magnet, drawing scholars, poets, and thinkers like Marx to a flame. The Abbasids understood something that modern powerhouses like Silicon Valley have figured out. Knowledge is power, and they were all in on it. The House of Wisdom, founded by Caliph Harun al-Rashid and later expanded by his son al-Mamun, was the beating heart of this intellectual boom. Scholars there translated Greek, Persian, and Indian texts into Arabic, making the city a repository of world knowledge. It's been said that al-Mamun even sent emissaries as far as Byzantium to gather texts. Talk about a bookworm's dream. Now, before you start picturing a utopian library where everyone held hands and sang Kumbaya over scrolls, let's address the elephant in the room. The House of Wisdom wasn't just a sanctuary for dusty old books. It was a hub for scientific and philosophical debates, sometimes as heated as a modern-day Twitter feud. Scholars like Al-Khwarizmi, who gave us the term algorithm, thanks a million, buddy, were breaking new ground in mathematics and astronomy, setting the foundations for modern science. But don't be fooled into thinking this was all altruistic or purely academic. The Abbasids were shrewd enough to realize that scientific advancements could translate into military and economic power. Better astrolabes meant better navigation, which meant more trade, and you can bet they liked the sound of that. Speaking of trade, the Abbasids turned the Silk Road into their personal gold mine. Their strategic location allowed them to control key trade routes between Asia, Europe, and Africa. They didn't just sit back and collect tolls, though. They actively fostered trade by building infrastructure like caravanserais. Think of them as medieval truck stops, but with more camels and fewer fast food chains. The result? An economic boom that made the Abbasid treasury the envy of empires far and wide. This brings us to another layer of the Abbasid success story, their love for luxury. If you think modern-day billionaires have extravagant tastes, wait until you hear about Abbasid opulence. Caliphs like Harun al-Rashid were known for their lavish lifestyles, hosting banquets that would make even the most seasoned party planner blush. The palace in Baghdad wasn't just a residence, it was a statement, a glittering showcase of Abbasid wealth and power. But as much as we love a good rags-to-riches story, here's where the myth-busting comes in. The Golden Age wasn't golden for everyone. The Abbasids, despite their cultural and economic achievements, were also masters of political maneuvering, and at times, ruthless suppression. They had to deal with internal dissent, particularly from the Shia, who never forgot the Abbasids' betrayal of their promises post-revolution. The caliphs employed a network of spies and a highly efficient postal system to keep tabs on regional governors and potential rebels. It was less about trust and more about ensuring that no one got too big for their boots. Moreover, this period of prosperity didn't trickle down equally. While the elite enjoyed the fruits of this economic renaissance, the common folk often bore the brunt of heavy taxation. If you were a farmer or a merchant, you might not have felt the golden glow quite as warmly. The economy, much like today, had its winners and losers, and the Abbasids were nothing if not adept at playing the game to their advantage. And let's not forget the geopolitical chessboard. The Abbasids were constantly fending off threats from all directions. From the Byzantine Empire to the north, to the rising power of the Fatimids in North Africa, their borders were always under pressure. The caliphs had to be as skilled in diplomacy as they were in warfare, often using marriage alliances and treaties to keep the peace. It was a delicate balance, and one wrong move could topple the entire house of cards. So, was the Golden Age really as golden as history likes to paint it? Well, it's complicated. The Abbasids certainly achieved remarkable things, transforming Baghdad into a beacon of culture and learning, and their innovations laid the groundwork for future generations. But beneath the glittering surface was a world of political intrigue, social stratification, and economic disparity. The Abbasids weren't just enlightened rulers. They were canny leaders navigating a complex world, using every tool at their disposal to maintain their grip on power. As we continue to unravel the story of the Abbasid Caliphate, remember that history is never a simple tale of good versus evil. It's a rich tapestry of human ambition, strategic brilliance, and sometimes sheer luck. The Golden Age wasn't just a moment in time. It was a testament to the Abbasid's ability to adapt, innovate, and survive in a world that was anything but static. And that, dear listeners, is where we'll leave it for now, with the stage set for the next chapter in this fascinating saga. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the legacy of the Abbasids and the forces that would eventually challenge their supremacy. Now, let's peel back another layer of the Abbasid onion and dive into their bureaucracy, the original definition of red tape before it was cool. Picture this: a sprawling empire stretching across 3 continents with a dizzying array of cultures, languages, and currencies. Managing all that wasn't just a walk in the park. It was like juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle. The Abbasids, though, were nothing if not ambitious, and they tackled this challenge with a bureaucracy so complex it could make your head spin faster than a whirling dervish. First things first, the Abbasid bureaucracy was a marvel of medieval micromanagement. At its peak, it employed a small army of scribes, tax collectors, and officials all working in harmony, or at least trying to. The center of this bureaucratic behemoth was the divan, a sort of government office that handled everything from military affairs to, you guessed it, tax collection. It was the original big government, with fingers in every pie and a knack for keeping tabs on just about everything. Tax collection was where the rubber met the road. And let's be clear, the Abbasids were masters of squeezing every last dirham out of their subjects. The jizya tax on non-Muslims, the kharaj on land, and a host of other taxes meant that the Abbasid tax system was as intricate as a Persian carpet. Forget about modern tax codes being complex. These guys were the OGs of tax intricacy. And yes, they even issued receipts, because of course you needed proof that you'd paid your dues to the Caliphate. But here's the kicker, the sheer absurdity of some of these tax policies. In one particularly eyebrow-raising case, tax collectors would measure the height of crops to determine the tax owed. Imagine the bureaucracy involved in that little endeavor. It's like the IRS showing up at your farm with a yardstick and a calculator. And if you think modern governments have a monopoly on inefficiency, think again. The Abbasid system was full of delays, errors, and good old-fashioned corruption, enough to make a DMV line look like a sprint. Now, let's talk about the social fabric of the Abbasid Empire, where gender roles and class structures were as tangled as a soap opera plotline. This wasn't just a top-down society. It was a complex web of relationships and hierarchies. Social mobility existed, but it was often more of a game of snakes and ladders than a straight climb up the social ladder. In the Abbasid world, the caliph was at the top of the pyramid, a position as much divine as it was political. Below him were the aristocrats and the religious elite, who wielded considerable power and influence. But don't be fooled into thinking these were the only players in town. The real backbone of the empire was the merchant class. Baghdad was a bustling trade hub, and its merchants were the Silicon Valley startup founders of their day. They were pivotal in keeping the economy humming, and their influence often extended beyond the marketplace. When it came to gender roles, the Abbasid period was a mixed bag. On one hand, women in the Caliphate had more freedom than their European counterparts, with rights to own property and engage in business. But don't go romanticizing this too much. The patriarchal norms of the time meant that women were often confined to the domestic sphere, and their roles in public life were limited. The harem system, romanticized in countless tales, was a reality that underscored the gender divide. The harem wasn't just a place of leisure. It was a complex institution where women wielded influence, but also navigated a labyrinth of power dynamics. Class structures in the Abbasid Empire were equally intricate. At the bottom were the peasants and laborers, whose lives were often hard and unforgiving. They bore the brunt of taxation and were the backbone of the agricultural economy. Above them were the artisans and craftsmen, whose skills were in high demand in a society that prized luxury and sophistication. And let's not forget the scholars and intellectuals, who enjoyed a special place in Abbasid society, thanks to the Caliphate's patronage of learning and the arts. But here's the rub. As much as the Abbasids valued knowledge and culture, they were also adept at using it as a tool of control. The ulama, a body of Islamic scholars, played a crucial role in legitimizing the caliph's rule. The caliphs understood that religious authority was key to maintaining power, and they were experts at co-opting religious leaders to their cause. It was a delicate dance of mutual benefit, with the ulama gaining influence and the caliphs reinforcing their divine right to rule. In the end, the Abbasid bureaucracy was a double-edged sword. It was both a marvel of organization and a nightmare of inefficiency. It kept the empire running, but also sowed the seeds of discontent. The social fabric was just as complex, with layers of class and gender dynamics that could rival any modern drama. Yet, despite the challenges, the Abbasids managed to maintain their grip on power for centuries. They were shrewd, adaptable, and above all, survivors in a world that was constantly shifting beneath their feet. So, what's the takeaway from this chapter of Abbasid history? It's the reminder that behind every grand empire is a tangle of bureaucracy and human complexity. The Abbasids weren't just rulers. They were managers of a vast, intricate system that required constant vigilance and a knack for political chess. As we wrap up this section, remember that the Abbasid story is far from over. There's more intrigue, innovation, and yes, a fair share of drama to come. Stay tuned for the next installment, where we'll delve deeper into the forces that shaped and eventually challenged the Abbasid supremacy. And just like that, the Abbasid Caliphate was humming along, a grand tapestry woven with threads of ambition, intellect, and a dash of cunning. But as every party planner knows, even the most elaborate soiree can end in a mess when the champagne runs dry, and the Abbasids were heading straight for a hangover of epic proportions. You see, running a sprawling empire wasn't just a feat of strength, it was a marathon of endurance, and the Abbasids were starting to feel the burn. Internally, the cracks were showing, the kind of cracks that you might initially brush off as character, before realizing your empire is more like a crumbling edifice. The Abbasid administration, as complex and intricate as a Byzantine fresco, began to buckle under its own weight. Picture a bureaucratic beast so immense that if you nudged it with a feather, it'd topple over like a Jenga tower. The divan was no longer the well-oiled machine it once was. Instead, it was a ponderous juggernaut of inefficiency, riddled with corruption and bogged down by red tape. Local officials, drunk on their own little slices of power, started acting more like feudal lords than loyal servants of the Caliphate. But it wasn't just the bureaucrats getting too big for their boots. The Abbasid caliphs, in their infinite wisdom, or perhaps hubris, began to overextend their reach. They loved a good land grab, but like a kid in a candy store, they didn't know when to stop. Their dominion stretched from the Atlantic coast of North Africa, across the Middle East, and into the Indian subcontinent. But here's the rub. More land meant more mouths to feed, more borders to defend, and more headaches to manage. The caliphs found themselves in an endless game of geopolitical whack-a-mole, trying to keep a lid on regions that were as unruly as a herd of cats in a thunderstorm. Adding fuel to the fire were the external threats that lurked like sharks just beyond the breakers. The Byzantine Empire, ever the opportunistic neighbor, pounced on any sign of weakness, like a cat eyeing a wounded bird. To the east, the Samanids and the Ghaznavids were rising powers, flexing their muscles and eyeing Abbasid territories with undisguised envy. And let's not forget the Fatimids in North Africa, who weren't just content with their slice of the pie, but wanted a shot at the whole bakery. The Abbasids were caught in a pressure cooker of their own making, and the lid was about to blow. Enter the Seljuks, stage right. These guys were the medieval power brokers, the kingmakers who swaggered onto the scene like they owned the place. And in a way, they did. By the mid-11th century, the Seljuks had become the de facto rulers, with the caliphs reduced to little more than figureheads. The Seljuk sultans pulled the strings, while the Abbasid caliphs played the ceremonial role, trotted out like prized ponies for religious legitimacy. It was a neat little arrangement that suited the Seljuks just fine, as they expanded their empire while keeping the Abbasids on a short leash. But let's not sugarcoat it. This wasn't a happy marriage. The power dynamics were as tangled as a medieval soap opera, with the Seljuks and Abbasids often locked in a bitter tug-of-war over control. The Seljuks, pragmatic as they were, dangled just enough power to keep the caliphs satisfied, but never enough to let them off the hook. It was a masterclass in political manipulation, and the Abbasids were the unwitting students. As if dealing with the Seljuks wasn't enough, the Abbasids had to face a threat that would make even the hardiest of caliphs break out in a cold sweat. The Mongols. If you thought the Seljuks were formidable, the Mongols were a force of nature, the ultimate wrecking ball that hammered through Asia with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Under the leadership of Genghis Khan, and later his grandson Hulagu Khan, the Mongols swept through the Islamic world like a tidal wave, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. And in 1258, they set their sights on the crown jewel of the Abbasid Empire, Baghdad. The sack of Baghdad was one of those cataclysmic events that makes you wonder if the history guards had a particularly dark sense of humor. In February of that year, the Mongols, with their fearsome reputation and terrifying efficiency, breached the city walls and unleashed chaos on a scale that would make even the most hardened historian wince. It was less of a battle and more of a massacre, with the Mongols laying waste to the city in a frenzy of destruction. The House of Wisdom, that beacon of knowledge and scholarship, was reduced to ashes. Thousands of manuscripts, the accumulated wisdom of centuries, were lost in the inferno. The Tigris River, it said, ran black with the ink of countless books, a poignant symbol of the cultural and intellectual loss suffered by the Islamic world. The Caliph, Al-Mustasim, met a particularly gruesome end, wrapped in a carpet and trampled to death by horses, an ignominious fate for the once mighty leader of the Abbasid Caliphate. But let's pause here for a moment. It's tempting to paint the Mongol invasion as the singular death knell of the Abbasids, but that would be too neat, too simplistic. The truth is, the Abbasid Caliphate had been on a slow decline long before the Mongols rode in. Internal strife, administrative decay, and a loss of central authority had all contributed to the Caliphate's weakening. The Mongols were the final nail in a coffin that had been years in the making. So, what are we left with? A tale of too much, too soon, a grand empire that reached for the stars but couldn't sustain its own weight. The Abbasid Caliphate was a marvel of its time, a testament to human ingenuity and ambition. But it was also a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the mightiest of empires are not immune to the forces of change and the passage of time. As the curtain falls on this chapter of the Abbasid story, remember that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry of human experience, rich, complex, and eternally fascinating. And with that, we leave the Abbasids to their fate, their once great empire a shadow of its former self. The legacy of the Abbasids lives on, testament to their achievements and a reminder of the fragility of power. But don't put away your history books just yet. The story of the Islamic world is far from over, and there are more tales to be told, more lessons to learn, and more myths to debunk. Stay tuned, dear listener, for the next chapter in this epic saga. And there it is, the Abbasid saga, a tale of triumph, tribulation, and the kind of dramatic plot twists that would make even Shakespeare raise an eyebrow. But before we roll the credits on this historical epic, let's take a moment to sift through the rubble and see what's left of the Abbasid legacy. Spoiler alert. It's not just a dusty old relic, but a living, breathing influence echoing through time. First up, science and culture. If the Abbasid Caliphate were a person, they'd be that Renaissance man who's annoyingly good at everything. Their contributions to science were nothing short of groundbreaking. During their golden era, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad was the intellectual equivalent of a modern-day MIT, minus the tuition fees and with more scrolls than laptops. Scholars like Al-Khwarizmi, who gave us algebra, so you can thank him for your high school headaches, and Ibn al-Haytham, a pioneer in optics, were just a couple of the brainiacs hanging out in Baghdad's bustling hub. And let's not forget the polymath al-Razi, whose medical texts were the go-to guides for centuries. While we're here, let's bust a myth or two. It wasn't all bearded scholars in robes nodding sagely over papyrus. The House of Wisdom was also a melting pot of cultures and ideas. Greek, Persian, and Indian texts didn't just collect dust on the shelves. They were actively translated, debated, and expanded upon. This wasn't some academic echo chamber, but a dynamic forum where cross-cultural exchange sparked innovation. The Abbasids showed that diversity wasn't a buzzword, but a catalyst for progress. Of course, the Abbasids weren't just about the brainy stuff. They knew how to throw a cultural party, too. Baghdad wasn't just a city. It was the cultural heart of the Islamic world, pulsating with poetry, music, and art. Poets like Abu Nuwas and al-Mutanabi were the literary rock stars of their day, crafting verses that resonated with wit, wisdom, and a fair bit of scandal. And let's not even get started on the art and architecture. The Abbasid style was like the Instagram of the medieval era, bold, intricate, and utterly captivating. Their architectural legacy can still be seen today in the grand mosques and palaces that dot the Middle East. On the religious front, the Abbasids played a pivotal role in shaping Islam's intellectual and spiritual landscape. They were instrumental in the development of Islamic jurisprudence, or fiqh, laying the groundwork for what would become the four major Sunni schools of thought. Their era saw the codification of hadiths, the sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad, which became a cornerstone of Islamic life. It was a time of theological debate and philosophical inquiry, with scholars like Al-Ghazali grappling with questions of faith and reason in ways that would influence Islamic thought for generations. But as always, there's a catch. The Abbasids' religious legacy isn't all sunshine and spiritual enlightenment. They weren't shy about using religion as a political tool, co-opting religious leaders to bolster their legitimacy. The caliphs were adept at playing the role of the pious ruler, but it was a fine line between faith and authority, a line they occasionally crossed with the finesse of a tightrope walker after a few too many sips of wine. So, how does all of this translate to the modern world? Well, for starters, the Abbasid legacy is still very much alive. Their contributions to science laid the foundations for the Renaissance and the subsequent scientific revolution in Europe. Their emphasis on knowledge and intellectual curiosity resonates in today's world, where innovation often springs from the mingling of diverse ideas and cultures. Culturally, the influence of the Abbasids is woven into the fabric of the Islamic world. From the literary traditions they nurtured to the architectural marvels they inspired. Their patronage of the arts set a precedent for future Islamic dynasties, creating a rich tapestry of cultural expression that continues to captivate and inspire. And then there's the matter of religious influence. The Abbasids helped shape the Islamic world as we know it, their theological and legal contributions forming the bedrock of contemporary Islamic practice. Their legacy is a reminder that faith and reason can coexist, that intellectual inquiry can enrich spiritual life, and that religious diversity is not a threat but a strength. Now, let's have a little fun with some historical what-ifs. Imagine if the Abbasids had hired a top-notch PR team. Instead of being remembered for bureaucratic bungling and the eventual Mongol smackdown, they might have been celebrated as the original Silicon Valley of the medieval world. Their achievements in science and culture could have been front and center, their narrative spun into a tale of enlightened leadership and cultural renaissance. But alas, they were too busy juggling political intrigue and tax collection to focus on their brand. If only they'd had a Twitter account to set the record straight. In conclusion, the Abbasids were more than just a dynasty. They were a force of nature. They transformed the Islamic world, leaving a legacy that's as complex and multifaceted as the empire they ruled. Their story is a testament to human ingenuity, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, brilliance can flourish. But it's also a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragility of power and the perils of overreach. As we close the book on the Abbasids, remember that history is not just a list of dates and events. It's a living, breathing narrative of human triumphs and trials, a kaleidoscope of stories that continue to shape our world. The Abbasids may have faded into the annals of history, but their legacy lives on, a testament to the enduring power of knowledge, culture, and curiosity. And who knows? Maybe one day we'll look back and see our own era reflected in the Abbasid story, a tale of ambition, innovation, and the eternal quest for understanding. In a world where thrones were as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel, Elizabeth Tudor made her grand entrance in 1533. Born to Henry Roman VIII and Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth's early days were less royal fairy tale and more Game of Thrones meets the Tudors. She weathered a childhood that was a masterclass in political chaos, filled with intrigue, betrayal, and oh yes, the occasional threat of execution. Not exactly the stuff of fluffy bedtime stories, huh? Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, was famously beheaded when Elizabeth was just 2 years old, a rather grim introduction to the concept of off with her head. After her mom's fatal fall from grace, Elizabeth was declared illegitimate. Just like that, she went from princess to persona non grata faster than you can say marital annulment. But this future queen wasn't just sitting around feeling sorry for herself. No, Elizabeth was busy laying the groundwork for her future reign, soaking up knowledge like a sponge in the Tudor court. This young lady wasn't your run-of-the-mill princess. Elizabeth got an education that would make modern Ivy Leaguers jealous. We're talking Latin, Greek, French, Italian, history, rhetoric, and even a bit of astrology. By the age of 12, she was translating classical texts, because why not be a linguistic overachiever? Her brains were as sharp as her father's axe, and she needed every bit of that intellect to survive in Tudor England's cutthroat political arena. Fast forward to 1558, and Elizabeth is staring down the barrel of the English crown. Her sister Mary I, who wasn't exactly winning any popularity contests with her whole Bloody Mary phase, had just died. Elizabeth was 25, a redhead with a reputation for being clever and cautious. She inherited a kingdom that was as disjointed as a DJ scratching on a bad turntable. The nation was broke, religious tensions were harder than a bonfire, and foreign powers were eyeing England like a juicy steak. But Elizabeth was no damsel in distress. She had a head for politics and a knack for image crafting that would make a modern PR guru weep. Enter the Virgin Queen persona, a neat little piece of branding that was more fantasy than fact. Elizabeth never married, but she wasn't exactly living like a cloistered nun. Her court was full of handsome suitors and juicy rumors, but she kept them all at arm's length. Marriage, she knew, was a political minefield. She preferred to keep the power to herself rather than share it with some power-hungry husband. Elizabeth's reign began with a bang, and not just because she was literally crowned. She was a Protestant queen in a country that had been swinging between Catholic and Protestant like a religious pendulum. Her predecessor and half-sister, Mary I, had tried to drag England back to Catholicism with all the subtlety of a bulldozer. Elizabeth had to walk a tightrope, balancing the religious factions while trying not to get excommunicated or, murdered. Now, let's talk about Elizabeth's savvy use of her image. The Virgin Queen wasn't just a catchy title, it was political armor. By remaining single, Elizabeth kept foreign suitors guessing and her own nobles on their toes. Had she married a foreign prince, England could have ended up as a mere province in a continental empire. Marry an English lord, and she'd risk empowering one faction over another, potentially sparking civil war. Her singleness was less about chastity and more about strategy. That said, Elizabeth was no saint. She could be vain, temperamental, and downright ruthless. But hey, ruling in a man's world wasn't a job for wallflowers. She knew how to play the Game of Thrones with the best of them, using her gender as a tool rather than a hindrance. Her portraits, which she controlled meticulously, showed a regal, untouchable icon, not the sharp-tongued ruler who navigated politics like a seasoned chess player. The Virgin Queen myth was a masterstroke, but the reality was more complicated. Elizabeth's court was a hotbed of intrigue, and she was at the center of it all, wielding her power like a maestro, conducting a symphony of ambition and rivalry. She kept her courtiers guessing, her enemies at bay, and her people, well, relatively happy given the circumstances. Elizabeth's early reign was a testament to her resilience and cunning. She turned a kingdom on the brink into a burgeoning empire, all while sidestepping marriage proposals like a pro. Her legacy wasn't built on some idealized version of purity, but on a savvy understanding of power and perception. The young girl who once worried for her life in her father's court had become a queen who defined an era, setting the stage for one of history's most illustrious reigns. While Elizabeth was busy redefining what it meant to be a queen, she was also setting the stage, literally, for a cultural renaissance that would make the Italian Medici clan look like mere warm-up acts. Welcome to the Elizabethan era, folks, where art and drama were as hot as the religious conflicts Elizabeth was deftly avoiding. The Queen had a flair for the theatrical, both in the political arena and on the actual stage, and she played the part of patron of the arts with all the gusto of an actor in the final scene of a Shakespearean tragedy. Now, let's talk about that guy, Shakespeare. You might have heard of him. William Shakespeare was the literary rock star of the age, the kind of guy who could turn a phrase so well that people are still quoting him 400 years later. But the bard didn't just spring fully formed from the dusty streets of Stratford-upon-Avon. No, he needed a stage, an audience, and, crucially, financial backing. Enter Elizabeth I, whose patronage of the arts wasn't just generous, it was transformative. Elizabeth understood the power of culture to shape national identity, and she used it as deftly as she wielded her political clout. By funding the arts, she helped turn England into a Renaissance powerhouse that could rival even the cultural titans of Florence. Her court became a vibrant center of artistic innovation, where playwrights and poets jostled for royal favor and sponsorship. It wasn't all high art and sophistication, though. The Elizabethan theatre scene was as rowdy as a modern-day football match, with the groundlings, those penny-pinching audience members, making their opinions known loudly and often. Shakespeare wasn't Elizabeth's only cultural investment. She also supported musicians like William Byrd, whose compositions were the Elizabethan equivalent of chart-topping hits. Byrd's music, rich and intricate, was a perfect fit for the complex tapestry of Elizabeth's reign. The Queen's patronage helped create a thriving music scene that was as much a part of her legacy as her political acumen. Because, let's face it, when you're ruling a kingdom that's one bad harvest away from a peasant revolt, a little music goes a long way. But with great artistry comes great chaos, and the Elizabethan court was no stranger to both. The Queen's theatrical flair wasn't just limited to her public persona. Her relationship with her artists was a drama in itself. Shakespeare and his contemporaries often found themselves hilariously entangled in royal politics and courtly intrigue. Take, for instance, the time when playwrights like Christopher Marlowe were accused of espionage. Marlowe, a contemporary of Shakespeare, was as much a spy as he was a scribe, proving that the line between politics and playwriting was blurrier than a rainy day in London. Elizabeth herself was no stranger to drama, both on and off the stage. Her love for pageantry and performance was legendary. She knew how to work a crowd better than most modern politicians. This was a woman who staged elaborate masks and pageants, using them as political tools to reinforce her image as the untouchable Virgin Queen. It was all about spectacle, about creating a vision of power and stability in a turbulent age. And it worked. Oh boy, did it work. Her theatrical flair was part of the glue that held her kingdom together, turning political pageantry into a fine art. The Elizabethan era wasn't just about highbrow culture, though. Elizabeth's England was a land of contrasts, where the sophisticated courtly entertainments were mirrored by the bawdy comedies and slapstick humor of the common folk. This was a time when a play could include both profound philosophical musings and fart jokes, often in the same act. Elizabeth wasn't above enjoying a good laugh, and the artists of her era knew how to cater to her tastes, balancing the sacred with the profane to navigate the treacherous waters of royal favor. In funding these artistic endeavors, Elizabeth wasn't just playing the role of a generous monarch. She was making a strategic investment in her nation's cultural capital. The arts became a soft power tool, one that helped project English influence far beyond its shores. As England's cultural prestige grew, so did its political clout, until the nation was punching well above its weight on the international stage. Elizabeth's reign saw England transform from a backwater into a burgeoning empire. The arts were a crucial part of that transformation. Of course, not everyone was convinced that this cultural explosion was a good thing. The Puritans, for example, were less than thrilled about the moral laxity of the theatres, railing against them with all the fervour of a modern-day Twitter rant. To them, the playhouses were dens of iniquity, breeding grounds for sin and vice. They weren't entirely wrong. After all, the theatre district was also a hotspot for gambling and other, shall we say, less than savoury activities. But Elizabeth turned a blind eye to their complaints, understanding that a little moral flexibility was a small price to pay for a vibrant cultural scene. All of this cultural production wasn't just about entertaining the masses or impressing foreign dignitaries. It was also about money, honey. The arts were big business in Elizabethan England, and the economic benefits were undeniable. Playwrights, actors, musicians, and artisans all contributed to a burgeoning artistic economy that helped fill the royal coffers. Theatres thrived, drawing in crowds that paid handsomely for an evening's entertainment. In a time when the line between survival and starvation could be razor-thin, this influx of cash was no small matter. Elizabeth's patronage of the arts was a testament to her understanding of the power of culture. She knew that art could be a unifying force, a way to bring people together and create a shared sense of identity. In an era where political divisions ran deep, the arts provided a common ground, a space where people could come together to experience something greater than themselves. This was no small feat in a kingdom as fractious as Elizabeth's, and it speaks to her skill as a ruler that she was able to harness the arts in this way. Through her support, Elizabeth not only helped usher in a golden age of English culture, but also ensured her own legacy as a patron of the arts. The Queen may have been a political powerhouse, but she was also a cultural innovator, one who understood that power and prestige were as much about perception as they were about policy. Elizabeth's reign was a masterclass in how to use culture to fortify a nation, and her impact continues to be felt to this day. As we continue to explore the Elizabethan era, remember that this was more than just a time of great art and literature. It was a period of profound transformation, one that reshaped England and laid the foundations for its future as a global empire. So, we've painted Elizabeth as the Queen of Culture, but let's pivot to the high seas, where the stakes were as high as the waves during a North Sea storm. It's the late 16th century, and England's foreign policy is like a never-ending chess match played on a teetering ship. Elizabeth had a knack for navigating these treacherous waters, both literally and politically. The Spanish Armada of 1588. Oh, that was just the headline act in a maritime drama filled with enough plot twists to make your head spin. Let's dismantle the romanticized vision of the Armada as a grand naval ballet. In reality, it was more like a chaotic dance-off where everyone was stepping on each other's toes. Picture a Spanish fleet of about 130 ships loaded with thousands of soldiers, all hell-bent on invading England. The Spanish, under King Philip Roman II, thought this would be a stroll in the park. Big mistake, amigo. The English, with their smaller, nimbler ships, turned the channel into a watery pinball machine. Now, the myth goes that Elizabeth, clad in her finest armor, rallied her troops at Tilbury with a speech for the ages. It's a rousing image, sure, but reality check. She was more about strategic dispatches than sword-waving. Her real genius lay in her ability to delegate. Enter Sir Francis Drake, the pirate-turned-national hero who knew how to throw a mean seafaring party. Drake and his crew harassed the Spanish ships like a pack of mischievous schoolboys, using fire ships to sow chaos. Numbers. England had around 200 ships, but many were merchant vessels, not warships. It wasn't the size of the fleet, but the strategy that counted. The Armada's defeat wasn't just about England's naval prowess, though. Let's give a nod to that great strategist, Mother Nature. Storms battered the Spanish fleet like a heavyweight boxer, scattering ships and dashing Philip's dreams of conquest. The aftermath was grim for Spain. Only about two-thirds of their ships limped back home, and thousands of sailors were lost to the sea. Talk about a bad day at the office. Economically, the victory was a game-changer for England. It wasn't just about avoiding a Spanish invasion. It was a bold statement that England was open for business on the global stage. The defeat of the Armada marked the beginning of the end for Spain's naval dominance, and opened the door for England to expand its trading empire. Elizabeth's foreign policy was less about territorial conquest and more about controlling the seas, the 16th century version of securing your Wi-Fi network. Speaking of trade, let's talk about the global shopping spree Elizabeth's reign kicked off. The New World was the ultimate mall, and England wanted in on the action. Thanks to explorers like Sir Walter Raleigh and John Hawkins, English merchants started bringing back treasures that made silks and spices look like dollar store finds. Tobacco, potatoes, and sugar, oh my, these weren't just novelties. They were economic game-changers that fueled the rise of the British Empire. But let's not kid ourselves. This era of exploration was also one of exploitation. The economic boom came at a human cost that was as high as the profits were sweet. The transatlantic slave trade began to rear its ugly head, and Elizabeth's England was not just a passive observer. Hawkins, for example, was one of the first Englishmen to profit from this horrific trade, setting a dark precedent for centuries to come. The riches of the New World were stained with the suffering of indigenous peoples and enslaved Africans, a grim reality that history books can't gloss over. Back in Europe, Elizabeth's foreign policy was a masterclass in playing the long game. She maintained a delicate dance with France and Spain, using diplomacy as a weapon to keep her enemies off balance. While the Spanish Armada was the headline grabber, Elizabeth's real victory was in establishing England as a formidable maritime power. The English Channel became less of a watery highway for invaders and more of a moat protecting Elizabeth's island kingdom. The economic growth from exploration and trade was staggering. By the end of Elizabeth's reign, London had transformed into a bustling metropolis, its docks teeming with ships from the farthest corners of the known world. England's newfound wealth funded everything from grand architectural projects to the continued patronage of the arts, making Elizabeth's court the epicenter of Renaissance culture. Elizabeth's reign wasn't without its challenges, of course. The Spanish threat may have been neutralized, but the French and the Dutch were always lurking, ready to pounce. Religious tensions simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. The Queen's ability to keep these various plates spinning was nothing short of miraculous. She was the ultimate multitasker, balancing diplomacy, warfare, and domestic politics with the poise of a tightrope walker. In short, Elizabeth's foreign policy and maritime adventures were a testament to her strategic genius. She turned a small island nation into a burgeoning empire, all while maintaining her grip on the reins of power. The Spanish Armada didn't just cement her legacy as a formidable ruler. It signaled the dawn of a new age for England, one where the seas were open for exploration, and the world was a playground for those daring enough to seize its opportunities. But remember, this was just one chapter in the epic saga of Elizabeth's reign. Stay tuned, because the real drama is far from over. Speaking of drama, let's pivot from the high seas to the equally turbulent waters of Elizabeth's love life, or, as history would have it, the lack thereof. You see, Elizabeth's romantic escapades are the stuff of legend, but they are not exactly the stuff of romance novels. More House of Cards than Pride and Prejudice. Love life was less about passion and more about political pragmatism. Elizabeth knew the marriage game was a political minefield. In the 16th century, tying the knot was as much about merging kingdoms as it was about merging hearts. But Queen Liz wasn't about to let a husband share her throne, even if he came with a fancy title and a kingdom to boot. She had seen firsthand what marriage could do to a queen's autonomy. Just ask her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, whose marriages led to more drama than a Shakespearean tragedy. Now, myth would have you believe Elizabeth had a heart of stone, but let's debunk that right away. She had her share of suitors, like Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, who was the court's ultimate heartthrob. Dudley was Elizabeth's childhood friend and remained the subject of much courtly gossip. People whispered about secret trysts and hidden love letters. In truth, their relationship was more political chess than romantic poetry. Sure, they were close, but Elizabeth knew that marrying him could unleash a storm of noble rivalries as fierce as any tempest on the Channel. Some say Elizabeth never married because she was hopelessly in love with Dudley. Others claim she was traumatized by her father's marital disasters. 6 wives, 2 beheadings, a divorce, and a couple of annulments would give anyone pause. But let's not forget Elizabeth's strategic brilliance. She wielded her unmarried status like a weapon, keeping foreign powers on edge with the ever-dangling carrot of potential marriage alliances. She was like a master puppeteer, pulling the strings of diplomacy through marriage negotiations without ever tying the knot. Elizabeth wasn't just playing hard to get, she was playing hard to conquer. Her roster of suitors was as long as a Tudor banquet table, featuring the likes of King Philip Roman II of Spain and Archduke Charles of Austria. Each proposal was carefully considered, not for romance, but for political gain. Marrying a foreign prince could have meant turning England into a pawn in someone else's game. Elizabeth wasn't about to let that happen. And what about the juicy court escapades? Well, they were plentiful. Take the scandalous case of Thomas Seymour, who reportedly tried to woo the young Elizabeth when she was just a teenager living with his wife, Catherine Parr. Seymour's ambitions were as transparent as a pane of glass, and his untimely execution for treason was a stark reminder of the dangers lurking in royal romances. Elizabeth's court was a hotbed of intrigue and flirtation, where love affairs could be as deadly as they were delightful. Courtiers played their own games, forming alliances and rivalries that could shift with the wind. A courtier's favor with the Queen could rise or fall based on a single misstep, much like the stock market today, only with more velvet and less insider trading. The unintended consequences of these romantic intrigues were manifold. Courtiers jostling for Elizabeth's favor often found themselves embroiled in scandals that could ruin reputations faster than you can say. Elizabethan tinder. The Queen's refusal to marry left a power vacuum where ambitious nobles jockeyed for influence, leading to plots and counterplots that could have made Machiavelli proud. Politically, Elizabeth's singleness was a masterstroke of independence. It allowed her to maintain control over her kingdom, ensuring that no foreign power could claim English territory through marriage. Economically, it meant that England retained its autonomy, free from the financial entanglements that often came with international matrimonial alliances. But let's not sugarcoat it. Elizabeth's decision to remain single was as much a personal choice as it was a political one. She was a woman who relished her autonomy, a ruler who understood that sharing power meant risking her carefully balanced control. Her reign was one of the most successful of the era, precisely because she didn't let matrimonial politics cloud her judgment. As we delve deeper into Elizabeth's love life, it's clear that the Virgin Queen's myth was both a shield and a sword. It protected her from the pitfalls of royal marriages while allowing her to wield power with unprecedented freedom. Her story is a testament to the power of myth and the reality of political strategy, a delicate dance that redefined what it meant to be a queen in a man's world. But don't go thinking we've wrapped up the tale of Elizabeth's reign just yet. There's more to uncover about how she managed to keep the reins of power firmly in her grip, even as England transformed into a burgeoning empire. Stay tuned, because the saga of Elizabeth I is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be just as thrilling. As Elizabeth's reign entered its twilight years, the world was changing faster than you could say. Renaissance. The Virgin Queen stood at the helm of an England that was no longer the scrappy underdog of Europe, but a burgeoning power with its sights set on the global stage. By the time she shuffled off this mortal coil in 1603, Elizabeth had ruled for 44 years, an impressive tenure in the cutthroat arena of Tudor politics. But let's not get too misty-eyed just yet. There's plenty to unpack about how her legacy shaped not just the Renaissance, but the very fabric of modern England. Elizabeth's later years were marked by a shift in priorities. The heady days of naval conquests and courtly intrigues gave way to more pressing concerns, namely, how to ensure England's stability after she was gone. Although she famously declared, "I have the heart and stomach of a king," Elizabeth had no heir to pass her crown to, which was a bit of a sticking point for those who preferred their thrones occupied. She skillfully manipulated succession plans, keeping potential contenders guessing right up until the end. It was a classic move from the Elizabethan playbook. Keep everyone on their toes, and they'll be too busy to plot against you. But it wasn't all cloak and dagger politics. Elizabeth's reign saw England transform economically, riding the wave of the global trade boom she had helped initiate. By the late 16th century, London's population had ballooned to over 200,000, making it one of the largest cities in Europe. The city was a bustling hive of activity, with merchants peddling everything from exotic spices to luxurious silks. The Royal Exchange, established in 1565, became the heart of England's economic empire, a buzzing stock market where fortunes were made and lost faster than you can say, bear market. Elizabeth's economic policies weren't just about filling the royal coffers, although that was a nice perk. They were about laying the groundwork for a modern economy, one that was increasingly driven by trade and innovation. The Queen's support of ventures like the Muscovy Company and the Levant Company opened up new markets for English goods, turning England into a commercial powerhouse that could rival the mighty Spanish and Ottoman empires. And let's not forget the cultural impact of Elizabeth's reign, a golden age of art and literature that reshaped England's national identity. The Elizabethan era wasn't just an artistic renaissance, it was a cultural revolution that laid the foundations for modern English society. Shakespeare, Marlowe, and their contemporaries weren't just scribbling plays for fun. They were crafting a shared cultural narrative, one that defined what it meant to be English in an increasingly interconnected world. The Globe Theatre, opened in 1599, became the epicenter of this cultural explosion, drawing crowds eager to see the latest works by the bard and his peers. Elizabeth's patronage of the arts wasn't just about creating pretty pictures or entertaining the masses. It was a strategic move to unify a nation divided by religious and political tensions. By fostering a vibrant cultural scene, Elizabeth created a sense of national pride and identity that transcended the sectarian divides of her day. This was no small feat, considering the religious roller coaster England had been on since Henry Roman VIII break with Rome. The arts became a bridge, a way to bring people together and forge a common identity in a time of uncertainty. But let's not sugarcoat it. Elizabeth's later years weren't all sunshine and sonnets. The Queen faced mounting challenges, both at home and abroad. The Spanish threat may have receded, but tensions with Ireland remained a thorny issue. The 9 Years' War, which raged from 1594 to 1603, drained England's resources and left Elizabeth's government scrambling to maintain control over the rebellious Irish chieftains. The conflict highlighted the limits of Elizabeth's power, a stark reminder that her reign was not without its flaws. And then there were the domestic challenges. The latter part of Elizabeth's reign was marked by economic hardship and social unrest. Poor harvests in the late 1590 led to widespread famine, and the once thriving economy began to falter. Inflation soared, and unemployment rates skyrocketed, leading to increasing discontent among the lower classes. The Queen's response was a series of poor laws aimed at providing relief to the needy, but these measures were more band-aid than cure, a temporary fix for a deeper economic malaise. Despite these challenges, Elizabeth's legacy endured, a testament to her skill as a ruler and her impact on the Renaissance and beyond. She left behind a nation that was more unified, more prosperous, and more culturally vibrant than the one she had inherited. Her reign laid the foundations for England's emergence as a global empire, a legacy that would shape the course of history for centuries to come. So, what's the takeaway from Elizabeth's storied reign? For starters, she was a master of image crafting, a proto-spin doctor who understood the power of perception long before the age of social media influencers. Her Virgin Queen persona was a political masterstroke, a way to maintain control in a man's world while keeping potential suitors and invaders at bay. She was a savvy politician who navigated the treacherous waters of Tudor politics with aplomb, a ruler who understood that power was as much about perception as it was about policy. Elizabeth's reign also reminds us that history is never as simple as it seems. The Virgin Queen myth is alluring, but the reality was far more complex. Elizabeth was a ruler who made difficult choices, who balanced pragmatism with idealism, and who understood that leadership was as much about managing expectations as it was about making bold decisions. She was a woman who defied the conventions of her time, who rewrote the rules of what it meant to be a monarch in a world dominated by men. As for her impact on pop culture, well, Elizabeth's legacy is alive and well. From films and TV shows to novels and plays, her life continues to captivate audiences around the world. She's been portrayed by everyone from Cate Blanchett to Judi Dench, each interpretation adding another layer to the myth and reality of Elizabeth I. Her story is one of resilience, of defying the odds and carving out a place in history, a narrative that resonates as much today as it did over 4 centuries ago. In the end, Elizabeth's legacy is a testament to the power of myth and the enduring allure of a queen who ruled with both heart and mind. Her story is a reminder that history is never just black and white, that the truth is often found in the shades of grey that lie between the legend and the reality. So here's to Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, the cultural icon, the political powerhouse, a woman who left an indelible mark on history and whose influence continues to shape the world we live in today. In the glittering halls of Versailles, where the chandeliers outnumbered logical financial decisions, a young woman named Marie Antoinette was about to become one of history's most notorious queens. Born in 1755 as Maria Antonia Josepha Johanna, because why not have a name as long as a royal title? She was the 15th child of Empress Maria Theresa of Austria. Yes, 15th. Apparently, Marie's mom took go big or go home, quite literally. This Austrian archduchess was thrust into the opulent yet precarious world of French royalty at just 14 years old, leaving behind the charming chaos of Vienna for the ceremonial chaos of Versailles. Marie Antoinette's journey to the French throne began with a marriage contract signed when she was merely a kid playing with dolls. In 1770, she married the Dauphin of France, Louis Auguste, who would later become Louis Roman XVI. Now, Louis wasn't exactly Prince Charming. He was more like Prince Socially Awkward, with a penchant for larks and keys. Seriously, the guy loved tinkering with larks. It took them a solid 7 years before they figured out the whole air-producing thing, which was a bit of a problem when your main job as queen is to pump out royal successors like a regal Pez dispenser. Life at Versailles was a spectacle of excess that could make a Vegas casino blush. The palace was a financial sinkhole, a testament to the phrase, living beyond your means. France was neck-deep in debt, with costs ballooning to astronomical levels in the 18th century. They spent about 6% of the national budget just on maintaining the palace, a sum that could have fed a small country or at least bought a few nice wigs. And speaking of wigs, Marie Antoinette was quite the fashionista. Our girl Marie was a trendsetter in every sense. Her hairstyles were so towering that they required scaffolding to assemble. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating, but they did need wires and pads to keep them upright. She even once wore a ship in her hair to celebrate a French naval victory. That's right, a literal ship. Her wardrobe budget alone was enough to make the finance minister reach for the smelling salts, as she spent around 120,000 livres a year on clothes. To give you a sense of scale, a skilled worker's annual wage back then was about 300 livres. Marie's fashion choices were not just clothes, they were political statements that said, "Let them eat cake," long before she allegedly uttered the infamous and probably apocryphal line. But while Marie was busy strutting around in her high heels, the French economy was doing a not-so-graceful pirouette toward disaster. The financial strain of supporting the American Revolution, because why not get involved in someone else's war, mixed with poor harvests, left the common folk wondering if Marie's hair was the only thing reaching new heights. The stark contrast between the opulent lifestyle of the royals and the peasants' struggle for bread sparked a powder keg that would eventually explode in revolution. Despite her public image as a spendthrift, Marie Antoinette was not entirely oblivious to the plight of her subjects. She established a haymow, or hamlet, at Versailles, where she played at being a shepherdess, milking cows and tending sheep. It was like an 18th century version of a reality TV show, where the queen played peasant for a day. While this was meant to show empathy, it did come across as a bit Marie Antoinette. The LARP edition. Marie Antoinette's marriage to Louis Roman XVI was more a political maneuver than a romantic fairy tale. Their union was supposed to cement an alliance between Austria and France, two countries with a history of eyeing each other like competitors at a bake-off. Yet this political chess move brought together two very different personalities. Louis was reserved and scholarly, while Marie was lively and loved a good party. The two eventually grew fond of each other, but it wasn't love at first sight. More like a slow burn romance, complicated by the pressures of producing an heir and managing a country teetering on the brink of financial ruin. The court of Versailles was a hotbed of intrigue and gossip, and Marie Antoinette was often caught in the crossfire. Pamphlets and rumors circulated faster than a modern-day meme, painting her as frivolous, out of touch, and sometimes scandalously inappropriate. In reality, Marie's spending habits, while certainly flamboyant, were not the sole cause of France's financial woes. Still, the optics of her extravagant lifestyle did little to endear her to the struggling populace. As Marie Antoinette settled into her role as queen, she became a symbol of everything that was both alluring and problematic about the French monarchy. Her life at Versailles was a dazzling spectacle, but beneath the surface lay a nation on the verge of monumental change. The Queen's story is a stark reminder of how perception can overshadow reality, and how a young woman's journey from Austrian Archduchess to French Queen was more complex and tragic than the legend suggests. As Marie Antoinette settled deeper into her role at Versailles, the palace buzzed with a blend of splendor and discontent. She became a living emblem of both the allure and the pitfalls of the French monarchy, a glittering symbol who mesmerized some yet repelled others. Her penchant for opulence was no secret. Her wardrobe alone could have outfitted a small army of fashionistas. But here's the kicker. Marie's spending spree, while lavish, wasn't the sole culprit behind France's fiscal fiasco. Sure, those 120,000 livers a year on clothes seemed excessive, but that was just a pearl in the ocean of royal expenditures. The real budget buster. France's debt was skyrocketing faster than you can say economic meltdown, largely due to costly military escapades, and you guessed it, the upkeep of Versailles. Now, let's tackle the infamous line that stuck to Marie like glue. Let them eat cake. Spoiler alert, she probably never said it. This juicy tidbit was actually floating around long before Marie's time, attributed to various royals as the ultimate burn on the starving masses. Yet it stuck to her, like blame at a family dinner. Why? Well, Marie's image was the perfect storm of extravagance meeting public disdain. She became the scapegoat of an entire system's failure, a human lightning rod for the anger of a nation grappling with hunger and inequality. Versailles, with its hallways wider than some of the era's streets, was ground zero for the kind of gossip that would make a tabloid editor blush. Marie's life in the palace was a reality show before reality TV was a thing. Courtiers whispered scandalous tales about her private life, fueled by pamphlets that spread faster than a Twitter rumor. These little leaflets painted Marie as a frivolous spendthrift who danced while Paris burned. Literally. The affair of the diamond necklace in 1785 didn't help her image either. It was a convoluted scandal involving a ridiculously expensive necklace, worth about 1.6 million livres, or a modern-day yacht, and a forged letter supposedly from Marie requesting it. The Queen had nothing to do with the scam, but the damage to her reputation was like water off a dam, unstoppable. So, what was really going on in Marie's head? While the public saw her as a clueless party girl, she was grappling with immense pressure. Her role wasn't just to look fabulous. It was to produce an heir, something that took a good 7 years to achieve, and even then, it was like winning a royal lottery. Not to mention, she was juggling the politics of a crumbling monarchy and a restless populace. Picture Marie in a gown with a train long enough to trip an entire ballroom, trying to navigate a maze with no exit. Her Haymau, or Little Hamlet, was part of her attempt to connect with the simpler life, though it came off as more of an elaborate cosplay than genuine empathy. Meanwhile, the political climate was harder than a midsummer day in Provence. King Louis Roman XVI, with his love for larksmithing over leadership, wasn't exactly steering the ship with confidence. France's support of the American Revolution was draining the treasury like a leaky barrel, while poor harvests left the peasantry in dire straits. Bread riots became the new normal, a stark reminder that you can't eat wigs, no matter how grand. Economic divides were as glaring as the palace chandeliers, and the people were hungry for change, literally and figuratively. Marie Antoinette's life was a high-wire act, balancing on the tightrope of public opinion. Her every move was scrutinized, from her choice of fabric to her friendships. One of her closest allies was the Swedish diplomat Count Axel von Fersen, whose relationship with Marie fueled even more rumors. Were they more than friends? The jury's still out, but the speculation added another layer to her already complex public persona. As the 1780s wore on, the political pressures in France were like a pot about to boil over. The Estates General, a gathering of representatives from the different social classes, hadn't been called since 1614, but the dire situation forced Louis Roman XVI to convene it in 1789. It was a last-ditch effort to address the financial crisis and stave off disaster. Spoiler alert, it didn't exactly go as planned. The meeting quickly spiraled into chaos, laying the groundwork for a revolution that would change everything. Marie Antoinette's story is a study in contrasts. She was both a fashion icon and a political pawn, a misunderstood queen whose life was as tragic as it was extravagant. Her downfall wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was emblematic of a system teetering on the brink of collapse. The revolution was coming, and it wouldn't be kind to those who wore powdered wigs and satin shoes. Yet, as the curtain began to fall on the ancient regime, Marie's legacy, as a symbol of royal disconnect, would endure, a cautionary tale for anyone who dares to live in a gilded cage, unaware of the storm brewing just outside the palace gates. As the storm clouds of revolution gathered ominously over France, Marie Antoinette found herself thrust into the treacherous waters of political intrigue. A place as foreign to her as a budget is to a sharper harlot. The Queen, often portrayed as a fashion plate with a penchant for excess, was more than just a passive spectator to the crumbling monarchy. Let's dive into the letters, alliances, and political maneuvers that reveal a woman trying, perhaps desperately, to wield influence in a game rigged against her. First, let's talk correspondence. Marie Antoinette was no stranger to the quill, and her letters provide a window into her political mind. In an era where letters were the emails of the day, minus the spam, she penned missives to her brother, the Holy Roman Emperor Joseph Roman II, seeking advice and support. These letters reveal a woman aware of the political quagmire surrounding her, hungry for guidance in navigating the murky waters of French politics. Yet, despite her royal connections, Marie's influence was more limited than a Wi-Fi signal in a medieval castle. Her correspondence with Count Axel von Fersen is where the plot thickens, like a good soap opera. Their relationship has been the subject of speculation juicier than a tabloid cover. Were they lovers, or just close confidants? The truth is lost in the sands of time, but their letters hint at a deep bond. And while the romantic allure of a clandestine affair is tempting, reality was likely more mundane. A friendship born out of mutual understanding in a court rife with deceit and betrayal. Speaking of alliances, Marie wasn't just twiddling her thumbs while wearing impossibly high wigs. She attempted to forge alliances that could stabilize her husband's reign. One notable ally was Charles Alexander de Calonne, the Controller General of Finances. Calonne proposed sweeping economic reforms in the mid-1780, including a land tax that would apply to all landowners, not just the peasants. Sounds reasonable, right? Well, the French nobility, who had the political acumen of a toddler, weren't having it. They rejected the reforms faster than a nobleman spends his inheritance. Marie supported Calonne's reforms, seeing them as a way to avert financial disaster. But in the political climate of the day, where personal vendettas often trumped common sense, her backing was as effective as a paper umbrella in a monsoon. The reforms were scuttled, leaving Marie and Louis Roman XVI to face an increasingly hostile populace and a treasury that was emptier than a royal promise. Meanwhile, the Estates General of 1789 loomed large, a last-ditch effort to stave off chaos, and the chaos came in spades. As representatives from the three estates, the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners, gathered, tensions ran higher than the heels on Marie's shoes. The third estate, representing the commoners, was fed up with the inequities of a system that treated them like dirt under a noble's boot. They demanded more power, and when their requests were ignored, they took matters into their own hands, declaring themselves the National Assembly. This was a bold move, akin to flipping the table in a high-stakes poker game, and it set the stage for a revolution that would shake the foundations of France to its core. Amidst this turmoil, Marie Antoinette's role was less about political power and more about survival. Her attempts to influence policy were often thwarted by a court that saw her as an outsider, a foreign queen whose loyalty was questioned at every turn. Her Austrian heritage was a convenient scapegoat for those looking to blame someone, anyone, for the kingdom's woes. Pamphlets of the time painted her as a scheming harpy, a narrative that was more fiction than fact, but resonated with a populace eager for someone to blame. And let's not forget the affair of the diamond necklace, a debacle that made Marie the poster child for royal excess, even though she had no part in it. This scandal, involving a forged letter and a necklace that could buy a small kingdom, reinforced the image of Marie as a frivolous spender out of touch with her people. The reality was more nuanced, but nuance isn't exactly what you'd find in the headlines of the day. As France edged closer to revolution, Marie's life became a chess game with no clear path to victory. Her attempts to influence the king were often met with resistance, not just from Louis himself, whose love of locksmithing far exceeded his interest in governance, but from a court mired in its own intrigues. Marie's efforts to secure alliances were thwarted by the very system she was trying to save, leaving her isolated and increasingly desperate. In these final years of the ancient regime, Marie Antoinette's story was one of a woman caught between worlds. She was both a symbol of royal excess and a victim of it, a queen whose attempts at political influence were overshadowed by the spectacle of her public persona. Her life was a testament to the power of perception and the harsh realities of a monarchy on the brink. As the revolution loomed, her role in the unfolding drama was far from over, with more twists and turns than a Versailles ballroom dance. Stay tuned, because the curtain hasn't fallen yet. The revolution is just warming up, and Marie's story is about to enter its most dramatic act yet. As the revolution simmered, threatening to boil over, Marie Antoinette found herself ensnared in a world where opulence met oblivion, and the guillotine loomed like an unwelcome guest at a royal banquet. Revolutionaries were gearing up to dethrone the old regime, and Marie's life was about to undergo a radical makeover. Think less couture, more chaos. The year was 1789, and France was a powder keg, ready to blow. The Bastille wasn't just stormed. It was a symbol torn down brick by brick, much like the monarchy's crumbling facade. This event sent shockwaves through the nation, signaling that the people had had enough of powdered wigs and pretentious pomp. The royal family was suddenly persona non grata in their own kingdom, a bit like being uninvited from the party you paid for. Marie and Louis Roman XVI were holed up in Versailles, which was more fortress than palace now. The National Guard, led by the Marquis de Lafayette, the dude who moonlit as a hero of the American Revolution, was supposed to keep the peace. But let's be real, keeping peace in this climate was like trying to put out a fire with a thimble of water. Marie Antoinette, ever the target of public scorn, found herself at the center of the storm. The angry masses, incensed by years of inequality, were now marching towards Versailles. On October 5th, 1789, the Women's March on Versailles saw thousands of women, armed with whatever they could find, pitchforks, pikes, and a righteous fury, demanding bread and the royal family's return to Paris. It wasn't exactly the kind of homecoming Marie had in mind. The royals were whisked away to the Tuileries Palace in Paris, a far cry from the gold-leafed halls of Versailles. The Tuileries wasn't a palace of dreams. It was more like a gilded cage. Queen's world shrank from the expansive gardens of Versailles to the confined quarters of the Tuileries, where privacy was as rare as a peasant's tax break. But Marie wasn't one to sit idly by, waiting for the revolution to write her obituary. She was plotting an escape, a high-stakes game of hide-and-seek with the revolutionaries. Enter the flight to Varennes in June 1791, a royal getaway that ended about as well as a soufflé in an earthquake. The plan was to slip away under the cover of night, disguised as commoners. Marie and Louis, along with their children, made it to Varennes, just 30 miles shy of the safety of Austrian territory, before being recognized and captured. Talk about a failed road trip. The escape attempt was a public relations disaster, akin to a modern celebrity scandal. It cemented the perception of the monarchy as cowardly and out of touch. Imagine being caught sneaking out of your own party. That's what it felt like for Marie. The people were less than amused, and the royals were escorted back to Paris under heavy guard. Their chance at freedom evaporated like morning mist. Political tensions escalated with the start of the Legislative Assembly in October 1791. The Assembly was a hotbed of revolutionary fervor, where moderates and radicals clashed like titans. The monarchy was now more symbolic than sovereign, with real power slipping into the hands of the revolutionaries. Marie, ever the political pawn, witnessed her influence wane as the revolution unfolded. By now, France was at war with Austria, a conflict that only added fuel to the revolutionary fire. Marie's Austrian roots made her a convenient scapegoat, branded as a traitor with allegiances more foreign than French. The pamphlets had a field day, portraying her as Madame Veto for her perceived opposition to revolutionary reforms. It was like having your worst high school photo plastered everywhere, only with more guillotines involved. The year 1792 saw the monarchy officially abolished, and Marie's situation grew increasingly dire. On August 10, revolutionaries stormed the Tuileries, and the royal family was arrested and moved to the Temple, a medieval fortress turned prison. It was goodbye to gilded mirrors and hello to stone walls. The Temple was no palace. It was a symbol of Marie's fallen status, a far cry from the grandeur she once knew. In these bleak surroundings, Marie's resilience shone through. She was no longer the fashion icon of Versailles, but a mother fighting to protect her children in a hostile world. Her letters from prison reveal a woman of strength, clinging to dignity amidst despair. It's a somber reminder that beneath the powdered wigs and silk gowns was a human being facing the unthinkable. By 1793, Louis Roman XVI had been executed, a fate that hung over Marie like the sword of Damocles. Her trial was a foregone conclusion, a kangaroo court with revolutionary fervor as the only evidence needed. The charges against her were as sensational as they were spurious, including treason and incest with her son, accusations more ridiculous than a royal wig at a peasant's wedding. On October 16, 1793, Marie Antoinette faced the guillotine. Her last words were an apology to the executioner for stepping on his foot, a final act of grace in the face of grim inevitability. Her death was a spectacle, attended by thousands, a macabre reflection of how far she had fallen from the heights of Versailles. Marie Antoinette's story is one of contrasts, from the glittering halls of Versailles to the grim reality of a revolution that showed no mercy. Her fall from grace was as dramatic as her rise, a tale of excess, intrigue, and ultimately resilience. As the blade fell, it severed more than a life. It marked the end of an era, a cautionary tale of power, perception, and the ever-volatile tides of public opinion. Stay tuned for the revolution's aftermath, because Marie's legacy, like a ghost in the halls of Versailles, continues to haunt the pages of history. With Marie Antoinette's life ending at the guillotine, you'd think her story would be as final as a period at the end of a sentence. But history has a way of making a comma out of what seems like an end. Marie's execution wasn't just the closing act of her life. It was the opening salvo of a new narrative, one that cast her as the ultimate scapegoat for France's monumental ills. In a nation starved for reform, she became the symbol of everything that was wrong with the ancient regime. Forget nuance. The revolutionaries preferred their villains like their bread, stark and unadorned. Marie Antoinette, in her final days, was less a queen and more a tragic figure caught in the whirlwind of change. Her trial was a theatre of revolutionary zeal, lacking the due process you'd expect in a fair judicial system. The charges against her were a smorgasbord of political theatre, treason, conspiracy, and even incest. The latter, a grotesque fabrication, was meant to paint her as morally reprehensible, a tactic to ensure she had as much public sympathy as a tax collector at a peasant's wedding. The actual verdict was as inevitable as a plot twist in a soap opera, guilty on all counts. But let's bust a myth. Marie's final days weren't spent in luxurious despair. Far from the opulence of Versailles, her last residence was the conciergerie, a grim, dank prison cell that was more dungeon than royal suite. The queen, once surrounded by courtiers and chandeliers, was now confined to a small room with a single bed, a table, and a chair. No silk drapes, no golden mirrors, just stone walls and the chill of impending doom. Her execution, on October 16, 1793, was a public spectacle attended by thousands. Each spectator eager to witness the downfall of a woman they had been led to believe was the architect of their suffering. Now, fast forward 2 centuries, and Marie Antoinette's legacy is a fascinating tapestry woven from threads of both truth and fiction. She's been romanticized in literature, film, and even fashion, becoming a cultural icon whose life is often viewed through a lens of glamour rather than grim reality. The phrase, "let them eat cake," although she likely never uttered it, embodies the caricature of her supposed indifference to the plight of the poor. In truth, it was a line from Rousseau's Confessions, attributed to an unnamed princess. Yet, the allure of blaming Marie was too tempting to resist for a populace hungry for change. Marie Antoinette's story is more than just a tale of excess and tragedy. It's a reflection of the human tendency to simplify complex narratives into digestible morality plays. Her life serves as a reminder that history is often written by the victors, who, in this case, were revolutionaries eager to cement their ideological triumph. But the real story, the one behind the powdered wigs and scandalous pamphlets, is of a young woman thrust into a role she was never prepared for, in a country teetering on the brink of chaos. Economically, Marie's spending was a drop in the vast ocean of France's financial woes. The real culprits were structural issues that had been festering long before she donned her first corset. The French monarchy, with its bloated bureaucracy and outdated taxation system, was ill-equipped to handle the economic challenges of the 18th century. The American Revolution, which France supported to the tune of 1.3 billion livres, didn't help matters. Marie's spending, extravagant though it was, became the visible tip of an iceberg that was sinking the French ship of state. Politically, Marie was a convenient target. Her Austrian roots made her suspect in the eyes of the French, who were wary of foreign influence. Her attempts to sway Louis Roman XVI, to broker peace, and to avert disaster were overshadowed by her public image, a queen more interested in fashion than governance. Yet, beneath the layers of silk and scandal, there was a woman who wrote letters pleading for peace, who sought alliances to stabilize the regime, and who, in her own way, tried to navigate the turbulent waters of French politics. As for her cultural legacy, Marie Antoinette has become a symbol of both opulence and tragedy. She's the poster child for the dangers of excess, a cautionary tale about the disconnect between the rulers and the ruled. But she's also a figure of enduring fascination, a woman whose life and death continue to captivate the public imagination. From Sofia Coppola's film to exhibitions at the Palace of Versailles, Marie remains a vibrant part of our cultural tapestry, embodying both the allure of the past and the lessons of history. In the end, Marie Antoinette's story is a reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of perspectives, where truth and myth intermingle to create narratives that endure through the ages. She was a queen, a mother, a scapegoat, and an icon. Her life, full of contradictions and complexities, offers a mirror to our own times, a reflection of the human condition and the eternal struggle between perception and reality. So, as you drift off to sleep, remember that history is not just about the past. It's a living tapestry that continues to shape our present and future. In the bustling Roman Empire of 76 AD, a baby named Publius Aelius Hadrianus was born in the small town of Italica, in what's now modern-day Spain. Now, if you're picturing a quaint, sleepy village, think again. Italica was like the Beverly Hills of the Roman provinces, a place for the fabulously wealthy and influential. It was the kind of place where you'd expect to see senators hobnobbing over wine, discussing their latest conquests in the far reaches of the empire. Hadrian's early life reads like a soap opera episode titled As the Roman World Turns. His father, a Roman senator, shuffled off this mortal coil when Hadrian was just 10, which left young Hadrian under the guardianship of none other than his cousin Trajan. Yes, that Trajan, who would later become the emperor. Talk about having connections. Trajan was like the George Clooney of the Roman world, charismatic, powerful, and with a fan club that spanned continents. Hadrian was sent to Rome for his education, and here's where things get interesting. You see, Hadrian had what some might call an obsession with all things Greek. He loved Greek philosophy, art, and even tried his hand at Greek poetry, which was probably the ancient equivalent of today's slam poetry nights. This passion earned him the nickname Greekulus, or Little Greek, among his peers. Not exactly the kind of nickname you'd want in a Roman high school, but it stuck with him nonetheless. And let's be honest, Hadrian wasn't exactly trying to shake it off. But Hadrian's love for Greece wasn't just a quirky hobby, it was a calculated move. By aligning himself with Greek culture, he was tapping into the intellectual and artistic elite of the time. It was like saying he preferred indie films over Hollywood blockbusters, an indication that he was cultured and a bit of a trendsetter. This penchant for Greek culture would later influence his architectural tastes and even his political strategies. Now, while Hadrian was busy reciting Greek verses and dreaming of the Acropolis, the political world was a hot mess of backstabbing and familial favoritism. Rome had this peculiar tradition of adopting successors, which was less about taking in orphans and more about strategic power plays. In 98 AD, Trajan ascended the throne, and it wasn't long before Hadrian was adopted into the emperor's inner circle, his ticket to the big leagues. This wasn't some touchy-feely adoption. It was a calculated move, the kind that makes modern nepotism look downright amateurish. But Hadrian wasn't just going to sit back and let his connections do the heavy lifting. He was a savvy operator, climbing up the political ladder with a mix of charm, intelligence, and a knack for being in the right place at the right time. By 100 AD, he had become a quaestor, a sort of ancient accountant, and then a praetor, which was like being promoted from intern to manager in the Roman political hierarchy. Let's talk about the political scene for a second. The Roman Empire was like a real-life version of Game of Thrones, minus the dragons, but with just as much intrigue and betrayal. To survive, you had to be as cunning as a fox and as charming as a peacock. Hadrian excelled at both, using his wit and connections to maneuver through the treacherous waters of Roman politics. Of course, his rise wasn't without its fair share of drama. Hadrian's marriage to Vibia Sabina, Trajan's grandniece, was more a political alliance than a love story. Sabina was reportedly as charming as a porcupine, and their marriage was about as warm as a Roman winter. But in a world where alliances were often sealed with matrimony, this union was a strategic move that solidified Hadrian's position within the imperial family. The adoption process in Rome was a curious thing. It wasn't just about family ties. It was about grooming the next emperor. Trajan's wife, Plotina, played a crucial role in this saga. Rumor has it that she favored Hadrian, and when Trajan was on his deathbed, it was Plotina who allegedly ensured that Hadrian was named as his successor. Some say it was a deathbed whisper, others claim it was a signed document. Either way, the transition of power was smoother than a Roman chariot race. By 117 AD, Hadrian was emperor, but his journey from Italica's cobblestones to Rome's imperial throne was far from a simple rags-to-riches story. It was a tale of strategic alliances, cultural obsessions, and a knack for navigating the complex web of Roman politics. Hadrian's early years set the stage for his reign as an emperor who would leave an indelible mark on the Roman Empire, all while maintaining that mischievous twinkle in his eye that said he was always one step ahead. And so, in 117 AD, the throne of Rome had a new occupant, Hadrian, the emperor with the twinkle in his eye and a penchant for shaking things up. Picture the moment he took the helm of the vast Roman Empire, stretching from the sun-baked sands of Egypt to the chilly shores of Britannia. Now, being emperor wasn't just about wearing a fancy toga and waving to adoring crowds. It was about leading a colossal enterprise, like being the CEO of the world's most powerful corporation, only with more gladiators and fewer board meetings. Hadrian's first order of business, a radical move that left many Romans scratching their heads and wondering if their new emperor had spent too much time in the sun. He abandoned Trajan's conquests in Mesopotamia. Yes, you heard that right. He gave up territories that Trajan had fought long and hard to acquire. It was like a kid returning the toy they begged for because they realized it was more trouble than it was worth. But Hadrian wasn't just throwing a tantrum. He was making a calculated decision. The Roman Empire under Trajan had expanded like a waistline during the holidays. But bigger wasn't always better, especially when you had to manage a sprawling empire with limited resources. Hadrian saw the writing on the wall. Maintaining control over these distant lands was a logistical nightmare and a financial sinkhole. Imagine the cost of stationing legions, building infrastructure, and quelling rebellions, a fiscal fiasco if there ever was one. By retreating, Hadrian was essentially Marie Kondoing the empire, tidying up and keeping only what sparked joy, or, in this case, stability and sustainability. Of course, not everyone saw it this way. To many Romans, this move was akin to waving a white flag, a sign of weakness. But Hadrian was playing the long game. He wanted a defensible empire, not one stretched so thin it could snap like a twig. And besides, he had bigger plans that involved dusting off his sandals and hitting the road. Hadrian was the emperor who couldn't sit still. He was like a Roman version of Anthony Bourdain, minus the camera crew and the culinary adventures. Over his 21-year reign, he traveled to nearly every corner of the empire, covering an estimated 50,000 miles. That's like circling the globe twice. He visited places that most Romans only knew from maps, turning the empire into his personal travel itinerary. His journeys weren't just about satisfying wanderlust, they were strategic. Hadrian believed that a hands-on approach would help him understand and manage the empire better. He wanted to see things firsthand, like an emperor conducting undercover boss missions, minus the fake mustache. This approach was revolutionary. No emperor before him had traveled so extensively. It was as if he was saying, to rule it, you've got to see it. Hadrian's travels were also about connecting with his subjects. He didn't want to be just a distant figurehead sitting on a marble throne in Rome. He wanted to be seen, to shake hands, or perhaps forearms, Roman style, with the people he ruled. This was a PR campaign before PR was even a thing. By being present in the provinces, he fostered loyalty and addressed local issues directly. It was Roman diplomacy at its finest, a bit of showmanship mixed with genuine engagement. And then there was Hadrian's beard. Ah, the beard. In a world of clean-shaven Romans, Hadrian's facial hair was like a mic drop. It was more than just a grooming choice, it was a statement. Hadrian's beard was a nod to Greek philosophers, a tangible sign of his intellectual leanings and admiration for Greek culture. It was as if he was saying, "I think, therefore I beard." This wasn't just a personal quirk. It sparked a fashion trend among Roman men. Suddenly, beards were in vogue, sweeping through Rome faster than a chariot race. Hadrian had turned a simple style choice into a cultural phenomenon. Ironically, while his beard was inspired by Greek philosophers, it was also practical for a man who spent much of his time outside in various climates. A philosopher's nod and a traveler's necessity. Now that's multitasking. Hadrian's decision to sport a beard was also an act of defiance against the traditional Roman values that favored clean-shaven faces. It was a subtle rebellion wrapped in whiskers, a reminder that he was an emperor who wasn't afraid to break with tradition. In a sense, Hadrian's beard was like his reign, unconventional, thoughtful, and a bit daring. As Hadrian traveled, he left his mark on the empire not just through governance, but through architecture. He wasn't content with just building bridges and roads. He wanted to build a legacy. His love for Greek architecture and culture translated into stunning constructions, like the Pantheon in Rome, which still stands today as a testament to his vision. Everywhere he went, he left a piece of himself, a stone or a column that whispered of his presence long after he had moved on. Hadrian's reign was a tapestry woven with travel, culture, and strategic vision. While some of his decisions baffled contemporaries and historians alike, they were part of a broader picture, a picture of an emperor who saw the world not just as it was, but as it could be. He was a man ahead of his time, a traveler with a map in one hand and a philosopher's scroll in the other. But Hadrian's story doesn't end here. His journeys and decisions laid the groundwork for a legacy that would be debated, dissected, and admired for centuries to come. From the dusty roads of the empire to the quiet corners of his soul, Hadrian's journey was just getting started. There's more to explore in the life of Rome's architect, and this is just the beginning of the adventure. So, stay tuned as we dive deeper into the intrigues and innovations of Hadrian's reign, one beard hair at a time. And speaking of adventures, let's delve into the architectural escapades of Emperor Hadrian, Rome's very own Bob the Builder. Imagine the emperor, not just content with ruling an empire, but itching to leave his mark, literally, on its landscapes and cityscapes. Hadrian wasn't just an emperor with a penchant for travel. He was a visionary with a chisel in one hand and a ruler in the other, setting out to transform the Roman Empire one brick at a time. First stop on our architectural tour, Hadrian's Wall. Ah yes, the wall that would make even the Great Wall of China do a double take. Stretching over 73 miles across the northern frontier of Britannia, this stone and turf barrier was Hadrian's bold statement. Here's where Rome ends and the barbarian chaos begins. Now, you might be thinking, was this wall really necessary? After all, the local tribes were more focused on their own squabbles than on storming Rome. But for Hadrian, the wall was less about defense and more about defining the limits of the empire, a tangible line in the sand, or mud, given Britain's weather. Building the wall was a massive undertaking, involving an estimated 15,000 men, and took about 6 years to complete. That's a lot of manpower, and a lot of time for a structure that was, let's face it, more symbolic than practical. It was a bit like buying a high-tech security system for a house that no one really wants to break into. But for Hadrian, it was about control, order, the Roman obsession with borders. It was a message to the world that Rome knew where its territory ended and was happy to point it out in stone. Economically, constructing the wall wasn't exactly a bargain bin project. The Roman coffers took a hit, with funds diverted from other parts of the empire to pay for the stone, labor, and logistics. But Hadrian's wall wasn't just a physical boundary. It was political theater, a grand display of Roman power and engineering prowess. It was also a way to keep those Roman soldiers busy and not thinking too hard about rebellion or insurrection. Next, let's wander over to Rome itself, where Hadrian really flexed his architectural muscles with the Pantheon. Originally built by Marcus Agrippa, Hadrian decided to give it a facelift around 126 AD, turning it into the iconic structure we know today. With its massive dome and oculus, that's the big hole in the ceiling for those not in the architectural know, the Pantheon was, and still is, a marvel of engineering. Imagine a concrete dome spanning 142 feet in diameter, an unparalleled feat at the time, and still the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome. That's right, Hadrian's team managed to pull off what would stump architects for centuries, a testament to Roman ingenuity and Hadrian's determination to leave a legacy. But why did Hadrian bother with such a colossal renovation? Well, aside from his love of all things Greek and grand, the Pantheon was a statement of religious unity. It was a temple for all gods, a place where Romans could worship the entire Pantheon without playing favorites. Now that's what you call divine diplomacy. Yet, not all of Hadrian's architectural endeavors were as practical or as enduring. Take, for instance, the Villa Adriana in Tivoli, a sprawling retreat that was less a villa and more a small city. Covering over 250 acres, it was a fusion of various architectural styles from across the empire, a sort of greatest hits album of Roman architecture. The villa boasted libraries, theaters, baths, and even a replica of the Nile River. Talk about an emperor with a taste for the extravagant. But here's the kicker. Hadrian rarely stayed there. It was more of a passion project, a testament to his eclectic tastes and a reminder that sometimes even emperors get carried away with their hobbies. This architectural obsession wasn't all about aesthetics and grandeur. It also had economic motivations. By investing in public works, Hadrian was stimulating the economy, providing jobs, and keeping the populace content. It was the ancient equivalent of a stimulus package, with a side of marble columns. Yet, despite the economic boost, some projects were criticized as vanity projects, more about Hadrian's personal tastes than the empire's needs. What's fascinating is how these architectural feats reflect Hadrian's personality, a blend of ambition, creativity, and a touch of eccentricity. He was an emperor who saw buildings not just as structures, but as symbols of Rome's glory and his vision. He pushed the boundaries of what was possible, both geographically with walls and artistically with domes, leaving a legacy that would influence architecture for millennia. Hadrian's architectural legacy is a mosaic of practicality and extravagance, of walls that defined empires and domes that defied gravity. His story is one of vision and vanity, of an emperor who built not just for his time, but for all time. As we continue to unravel the layers of Hadrian's life, remember that these structures were more than just stone and mortar. They were the embodiment of an emperor's dreams and his indelible mark on history. And while the story of Hadrian's architectural ambitions is far from over, we've laid the foundation for understanding a ruler who wasn't afraid to dream big and build even bigger. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the life and legacy of Rome's most creative emperor, one stone at a time. And speaking of emperors who weren't afraid to get a little personal, let's dive into one of the most talked about relationships in ancient history, Hadrian and Antoinette. If you thought Hollywood had the monopoly on celebrity scandals, think again. This ancient affair had all the elements of a Roman soap opera: love, tragedy, and a posthumous cult following. Hadrian met Antoinette around 123 AD during one of his many travels through the empire. Antoinette was a young Greek from Bithynia, now part of modern-day Turkey. And when I say young, I mean it. He was likely in his mid-teens when he caught the emperor's eye. This wasn't just a fling. Hadrian was smitten. Antoinette became a constant companion on Hadrian's journeys, kind of like a celebrity entourage member, but with a lot more historical weight. Their relationship was the talk of the empire, and not just because it defied the conventional Roman norms. Roman society was surprisingly open-minded about same-sex relationships, but an emperor openly favoring a young male lover. Now that was juicy gossip. Imagine the court whispers and raised eyebrows. It was the kind of scandal that would have set the Roman tabloids alight, if they had tabloids, that is. But all tales of romance must face reality, and this one took a tragic turn. In 130 AD, during a trip along the Nile, Antoinette drowned. The circumstances remain murky, with theories ranging from accidental drowning to ritual sacrifice or even suicide. Whatever the truth, the aftermath was clear. Hadrian was devastated. His grief was so profound that he did what only an emperor could. He deified Antoinette. Yes, you heard that right. Hadrian declared Antoinette a god. This wasn't just a small tribute. It was an empire-wide campaign. Statues of Antoinette sprang up faster than you could say divine favor, and cities were named in his honor. Coins bearing his likeness were minted, and a whole religious cult developed around his worship. Now, let's pause to consider the economics of mourning on such a grand scale. Deification wasn't cheap. The cost of commissioning statues, minting coins, and establishing temples added up. But for Hadrian, this was more than a financial outlay. It was an emotional investment. By elevating Antoninus to godhood, he was immortalizing their bond and perhaps easing his own grief. This wasn't without its political implications either. Hadrian's actions sent a clear message. He was an emperor who could humanize divinity and deify humanity. He was not just ruling Rome, he was redefining its cultural and religious landscape. This deification was like a divine PR campaign, one that blurred the lines between personal loss and public spectacle. Meanwhile, back on the home front, Hadrian's marriage to Vibia Sabina was about as warm as a Roman bath left overnight. Sabina, Trajan's grandniece, was no Antoninus. Reports suggest their relationship was rocky at best, with Sabina rumored to be less than pleased about her husband's very public affection for another. But in the grand tradition of Roman marriages, personal compatibility was often sacrificed on the altar of political necessity. Marrying Sabina had been a strategic move, consolidating Hadrian's ties to Trajan's lineage. It was the kind of marriage that made sense on a family tree, but not necessarily in the bedroom. Theirs was a union that balanced on the tightrope of realpolitik, where appearances had to be maintained even if the personal connection was as brittle as ancient papyrus. Despite, or perhaps because of, their frosty relationship, Sabina played her role as empress with aplomb. She accompanied Hadrian on some of his travels, offering the public image of a united imperial couple. Yet behind the scenes, it was clear that this was more a partnership of convenience than passion. Sabina's influence in court affairs was real, but their personal rapport was about as lively as a statue of Antoninus. For Hadrian, balancing these personal and political dynamics was a testament to his skill as an emperor. He managed to maintain his image as both a lover and a ruler, a man who could be feared and adored in equal measure. While his heart might have been with Antoninus, his head was firmly rooted in the political realities of the Roman world. Hadrian's life was a mosaic of contradictions, a blend of personal passions and imperial responsibilities. His relationship with Antoninus and his marriage to Sabina offer a glimpse into the complexities of his reign, where love and power intertwined in the most public of arenas. As we continue to unravel the layers of Hadrian's life, remember that history is as much about the people who lived it as the events they shaped. Hadrian was a man who loved deeply, ruled wisely, and left a legacy that would influence Rome long after his time. But the story doesn't end here. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the life of Rome's architect, exploring how his personal and political worlds collided in ways that would echo through history. And so, as Hadrian's personal and political worlds wove an intricate tapestry of love, power, and legacy, the emperor found himself facing the ultimate adversary, time. By the 130s AD, the once vigorous ruler was starting to feel the weight of age and illness. Hadrian, the globe-trotting architect of Rome, was now grappling with a more personal construction project, his own mortality. His health was a checkout line of ailments that would make any Roman physician's eyes light up with diagnostic glee. Hadrian suffered from chronic heart failure, which isn't exactly a walk in the imperial gardens. Imagine a life of constant fatigue, where every decision was punctuated by the shortness of breath. It was as if his body had declared war, and the emperor found himself besieged by his own failing systems. Despite his health woes, Hadrian wasn't one to sit idly by and let nature take its course. No, he had a legacy to secure and a successor to find. Enter Lucius Aelius, the chosen heir apparent. Now, if you're wondering why Hadrian picked Aelius, you're not alone. Aelius was a bit of a dark horse, an aristocrat with a reputation for being more of a socialite than a seasoned statesman. But in Roman politics, charisma was often just as valuable as competence, and Aelius had the former in spades. Unfortunately, the fates had other plans, and Aelius died in 138 AD, just a couple of years shy of the emperor's own declining health taking its final toll. It was as if the universe was throwing a cosmic wrench into Hadrian's succession plans. With Aelius gone, Hadrian turned to Antoninus Pius, a senator with a steady hand and a good head on his shoulders. Antoninus was the kind of guy who showed up to work on time and got the job done without making a fuss, exactly what Rome needed. Hadrian's choice of successor wasn't just about picking a competent ruler. It was about ensuring the continuity of his architectural and cultural vision. He wanted someone who could carry the torch, not fumble it in the dark. By adopting Antoninus and requiring him to adopt Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus as his heirs, Hadrian was setting up a generational relay race, handing off the baton of leadership with a calculated precision that would have made any track coach proud. But while Hadrian was busy orchestrating the future, his contemporaries were busy critiquing his past. His legacy was a mixed bag, a kaleidoscope of opinions reflecting the complexity of his reign. To some, Hadrian was a visionary, a ruler who saw the world through the lens of art and intellect. To others, he was a bit of a whimsical tyrant, a leader who spent too much time building walls and deifying lovers instead of conquering new territories. Hadrian's withdrawal from Trajan's conquests was particularly controversial. Many saw it as a sign of weakness, a retreat from Rome's destiny as a conquering superpower. But Hadrian, ever the pragmatic philosopher, understood the limits of expansion. He knew that an empire's strength wasn't measured by its reach, but by its resilience. His focus on consolidation and fortification was a strategic masterstroke, even if it wasn't the kind of bravado that made for exciting imperial propaganda. His architectural endeavors were similarly divisive. The Pantheon stood as a testament to his grand vision, while the sprawling Villa Adriana was seen by some as an exercise in imperial excess. Yet, even his critics couldn't deny that Hadrian left an indelible mark on Rome's cultural and structural landscape. The emperor's passion for architecture was more than a personal indulgence. It was a public service project on a grand scale, a way of ensuring that Rome's glory was built to last. As Hadrian's health continued to decline, he retreated to his villa in Baiae, a picturesque retreat on the Bay of Naples. It was here, amidst the tranquil waters and lush landscapes, that he spent his final days. In July 138 AD, Hadrian's long journey came to an end, and with it, an era of extraordinary leadership. His death marked the conclusion of a reign that had been as ambitious as it was introspective. In the end, Hadrian's legacy is a study in contrasts, a testament to the balancing act of power and intellect. He was a ruler who understood that strength lay not in conquest, but in culture, not in expansion, but in endurance. His life was a testament to the idea that true leadership is about more than just ruling. It's about shaping a world that reflects the best of what humanity can build. And so, as history judges Hadrian, it does so with the benefit of hindsight, recognizing the emperor as a man who dared to dream big and build even bigger. His reign was a mosaic of ambition and restraint, of passion and pragmatism. As we close the book on Hadrian's life, let's remember him not just as an emperor who ruled Rome, but as a visionary who redefined what it meant to lead. In the grand tapestry of history, Hadrian's thread is one of depth and complexity, a reminder that the greatest legacies are those that inspire, challenge, and endure. His story is a timeless lesson in the art of leadership, a masterclass in the delicate dance between power and intellect. As we reflect on Hadrian's life, let's carry forward his spirit of curiosity and creativity, continuing to build a world that reflects the richness of human potential. If you think the ancient world was as simple as toga parties and philosophical debates, let's take a detour and meet the Minoans, those enigmatic islanders who were living it up on Crete around 2000 to 1450 BCE. While mainland Greece was still figuring out how to start burning their dinner, the Minoans were busy building palace complexes that would make a modern architect swoon. We're talking about Knossos, Phaistos, and Malia, where the walls were adorned with frescoes so vibrant you'd think they'd just been painted last week. Consider these palaces the ancient world's equivalent of Silicon Valley, hubs of innovation, culture, and of course, a little bit of chaos. Now, don't let the serene blue seas and sun-dappled landscapes fool you. The Minoans were masters of the nautical trade, turning the Mediterranean into their personal shipping lane. They were shipping and receiving goods like nobody's business. Pottery, olive oil, saffron, and even some exotic bling like copper from Cyprus and tin from as far as Afghanistan. Imagine the logistics. It's a wonder they didn't invent the spreadsheet. The peak of their bustling civilization was around 1700 BCE, and their influence spread far and wide, long before the Greeks had even thought to start their famous Olympics. Art, you ask? Oh, the Minoans didn't just dip their toes in the creative waters. They dove right in. Their art was as sophisticated as a gallery opening in Manhattan. Frescoes depicting scenes of nature, religious rituals, and sports like bull leaping. Yep, that was a thing, covered their walls. It's as if Picasso and National Geographic had a love child. The Minoans didn't just create art for art's sake. These images likely had religious or social significance. The famous Prince of the Lilies fresco, for instance, wasn't just a pretty face. It spoke volumes about Minoan culture and possibly their religious hierarchy. But let's not forget the script. Linear, the Minoan script that remains a puzzle even the most caffeine-fueled linguists haven't cracked. It's like the Rosetta Stone's rebellious younger sibling that refuses to play ball. Unlike Linear B, which the Mycenaeans adopted and modified, Linear has left scholars scratching their heads and turning to conspiracy theories. It's a reminder of just how much we don't know about these ancient people, despite their apparent sophistication. Speaking of mysteries, let's address the Minotaur in the room, literally. The story of the Minotaur and its labyrinthine lair is the stuff of legend, but let's set the record straight. The Minoans probably didn't have a half-man, half-bull creature lurking under Knossos. The labyrinth myth likely stems from the complex layout of Minoan palaces with their maze-like corridors. Theseus probably never needed a ball of string to find his way out. But hey, a good monster story makes for a great campfire tale, and who doesn't love a bit of ancient horror? Now, while it's tempting to romanticize the Minoans as a peaceful, artistic society, reality, as always, adds a splash of cold water. The Minoans were no strangers to conflict, whether with nature, as earthquakes and volcanic eruptions sometimes shook their world, or with other cultures vying for dominance. Their civilization didn't vanish overnight, but by around 1450 BCE, the Minoans had largely faded, absorbed by the rising tide of Mycenaean power. The Minoan civilization is a testament to the complexity and sophistication of the ancient world, a reminder that history is not just a series of names and dates, but a tapestry of human experience, innovation, and yes, a bit of myth-making. As the Mycenaeans stepped onto the stage, they inherited a world rich with the legacy of these island pioneers, and the echoes of Minoan civilization continue to resonate through their art, architecture, and language. But that's a story for another time. Stay tuned as we delve into how the Mycenaeans picked up the torch and set it ablaze in their own unique way. As the Mycenaeans took their turn on the historical stage, they weren't exactly tiptoeing into the limelight. Picture, if you will, a society that emerged around 1600 BCE with a swagger that would make even the boldest reality TV star look like a wallflower. These were the folks who understood that if you wanted to make a name for yourself in the ancient world, you needed a good mix of muscle, cunning, and a little bit of cultural borrowing, preferably from your sophisticated neighbors. Let's start with their warrior culture. The Mycenaeans were the original tough guys. They didn't just talk the talk, they walked the walk, clad in bronze armor that gleamed in the Mediterranean sun. Their weapons, such as the iconic Mycenaean swords, were as much a statement piece as they were a tool of conquest. These blades weren't just for show. They were used in battles that helped the Mycenaeans expand their territories across mainland Greece. By around 1400 BCE, they were running the show, having taken over the formerly Minoan-dominated Aegean Sea. But let's not just pigeonhole them as brutish warriors. The Mycenaeans were also savvy operators when it came to trade and economics, a fact often overshadowed by their more bellicose reputation. They looked around, saw what the Minoans were doing with their trade networks and thought, we'll have a bit of that. Their entrepreneurial spirit was evident in their widespread trade connections, spanning from Egypt to Italy. They traded everything from ceramics to copper, indicating they weren't just good at swinging swords, they could barter with the best of them. Speaking of cultural appropriation, the Mycenaeans knew a good thing when they saw it, and they saw plenty of good things in Minoan culture. They took meticulous notes, adopting elements of Minoan art, architecture, and even religious practices. The grand palatial complexes at places like Mycenae, Turins, and Pylos had echoes of the labyrinthine Minoan layouts, albeit with a more fortified, no-nonsense aesthetic. It's as if they took the Minoan blueprint and said, let's add more walls, just in case. Now, let's dive into their script. Linear B, the Mycenaeans' answer to Linear A. If Linear A was an enigmatic whisper, Linear B was the loud, clear announcement of Mycenaean bureaucracy. Discovered in the ruins of Knossos and Pylos, this script was deciphered in 1952 by Michael Ventris, revealing that the Mycenaeans were not just warriors and traders, but also meticulous record keepers. Linear B was used primarily for administrative purposes, recording inventories and economic transactions. It was like the ancient world's version of QuickBooks, proving that even in antiquity, no one could escape the clutches of paperwork. And then there's the matter of their economic strategies, a polite term for what can only be described as raiding with a purpose. The Mycenaeans were the original venture capitalists, but with more swords and fewer spreadsheets. They didn't just rely on peaceful trade. They also engaged in what we might call hostile takeovers. These weren't just mindless plunders. They were calculated expansions of influence and territory, often targeting wealthy regions for their resources. In this ancient world of shifting alliances and rivalries, the Mycenaeans were nothing if not opportunistic. They capitalized on the decline of the Minoans, seizing control of trade routes and key locations. Their rise wasn't merely due to military might, it was also a shrewd understanding of the geopolitical landscape. They knew how to exploit weaknesses and fill power vacuums, a strategy that would serve them well until the eventual collapse of their civilization around 1100 BCE. This brings us to another important aspect of their culture, their architecture. The Mycenaean palaces were a reflection of their priorities: security, power, and prestige. Unlike the airy openness of Minoan complexes, Mycenaean architecture was all about fortification. Cyclopean walls, so named because later Greeks thought only the mythical Cyclopes could have moved such massive stones, surrounded their citadels. These walls weren't just for show. They were a practical response to the constant threat of warfare. And let's not forget the legendary Lion Gate at Mycenae, which stands as an enduring symbol of Mycenaean power. This monumental entrance, flanked by two lions, was designed to impress and intimidate, a fitting metaphor for Mycenaean society itself. They were a culture that understood the power of image and the importance of making an entrance. But it wasn't all swords and stone walls. Mycenaean culture also had a softer side, as seen in their art and pottery. While not as flamboyant as the Minoans, the Mycenaeans produced a range of beautiful ceramics and frescoes. Their art often depicted scenes of warfare and hunting, but also more serene images of nature and daily life. It's as if they were saying, we can appreciate beauty, but don't forget, we've got a mean right hook. The Mycenaeans were a complex society, and their influence would be felt long after their civilization faded. The Greeks that followed, the ones we often romanticize as the cradle of Western civilization, were in many ways standing on the shoulders of these bronze-clad giants. The myths and legends that arose in later centuries, like the tales of the Trojan War, were steeped in the legacy of the Mycenaeans. Their history is a testament to the interplay of power, culture, and survival in the ancient world, a story that's as compelling as any epic. As we continue to explore the Mycenaean legacy, remember that their story is far from over. We've only just begun to unearth the secrets of these ancient adventurers, and the best is yet to come. So, hang tight as we unravel the next chapter of this captivating saga, where the Mycenaeans continue to leave their indelible mark on history. And so, as the Mycenaeans strutted onto the stage of history, they weren't just borrowing Minoan culture, they were practically renting it with an option to buy. Let's dive into how these cultural magpies picked up Minoan aesthetics, religious practices, and even architectural blueprints, creating a fusion as complex as a modern-day smartphone, sleek on the outside, but with plenty going on under the hood. First things first, let's talk about art. The Mycenaeans, never ones to shy away from a good idea, adopted Minoan artistic styles like they were collecting trendy fashion pieces. Minoan frescoes, with their vibrant colors and dynamic movements, were the original it items. The Mycenaeans took these elements and added their own flair, creating a hybrid art form that was part homage, part innovation. Imagine a Mycenaean artist standing in front of a wall, brush in hand, thinking, what would a Minoan do? Before adding a bit more muscle to the figures depicted. They were like the Picasso of their time, except with more chariots and fewer existential crises. Moving on to architecture, the Mycenaeans took a page, or perhaps a scroll, from the Minoan playbook. They admired the open, airy palaces of Crete but thought, Let's add some walls. And by walls, we mean fortifications that would make a medieval castle blush. Their citadels, like those at Mycenae and Turin's, were fortified to the hilt with cyclopean stonework that seemed to scream, "We're here to stay." These weren't just palatial homes. They were strongholds designed to withstand both time and tribulation. It was a perfect blend of Minoan elegance and Mycenaean pragmatism, a real architectural smoothie. Now, let's get spiritual. Religion, in the ancient world, was a bit like a buffet, with cultures picking and choosing elements that suited their tastes. The Mycenaeans, not ones to pass up a good deity, adopted several Minoan gods and goddesses, integrating them into their own pantheon. This cultural exchange led to some awkward celestial family reunions, where Minoan and Mycenaean deities had to sit around the divine dinner table, getting to know each other. You can almost hear Zeus saying, "So, you're the new guy, huh?" as he sizes up the Minoan newcomers. But this wasn't just about adding more gods to their roster. The Mycenaeans also adopted Minoan religious practices, which included elaborate ceremonies that were both awe-inspiring and a tad terrifying. These rites often involved offerings and sacrifices, creating a religious experience that was as much about spectacle as it was about spirituality. It's like they were saying, why have a quiet service when you can have a full-blown theatrical production? And while we're on the topic of religion, let's debunk a popular myth, the Minoans and their peaceful goddess-worshipping society. While it's true that Minoan religion had its peaceful moments, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. The Mycenaeans, taking notes, understood the power of religion as both a unifying force and a tool for control. They knew that a well-timed sacrifice could keep the gods happy and the populace in line, a strategy that resonated throughout their culture and beyond. Economically speaking, the Mycenaeans were nothing short of strategic geniuses. They didn't just inherit Minoan trade routes, they expanded them, weaving a commercial web that stretched from Egypt to the Italian peninsula. It was a sophisticated operation, akin to running a multinational corporation today, except with fewer emails and more amphorae. They traded pottery, olive oil, and metals, proving that even in the ancient world, diversification was key to economic success. And let's not forget the social dynamics at play. The Mycenaeans, like any ambitious society, understood that power wasn't just about military might. It was about influence, and the best way to wield influence was to weave a cultural tapestry that included the best of what your neighbors had to offer. They were cultural chameleons, adapting and adopting in a way that allowed them to thrive in a world that was as competitive as it was complex. In this intricate dance of cultural exchange, the Mycenaeans didn't just copy the Minoans. They transformed and adapted these influences, creating a unique cultural identity that was both familiar and distinct. It was a testament to the power of cultural fusion, a reminder that history is not static, but a dynamic process of evolution and change. So as we continue this journey through the Mycenaean world, keep in mind that this was a society that didn't just embrace change, they embodied it. They were the original influencers, shaping a world that was as much about innovation as it was about tradition. Their story is far from over, and as we delve deeper into their legacy, we'll uncover more about how these ancient adventurers continue to leave their mark on the tapestry of history. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. The Mycenaeans didn't just embrace change, they were the ultimate early adopters, constantly on the lookout for the next big thing in the ancient world. But let's dive into the nitty-gritty of their relationship with the Minoans, where money talked louder than a Minoan priestess at a bull-leaping festival. First, let's look at the economic exchange between these two Bronze Age powerhouses. The Minoans, the original maritime moguls, had established a trade network that would make any modern logistics company green with envy. Their ships crisscrossed the Mediterranean, bringing back exotic goods like blue glass from Egypt, ivory from Syria, and spices from the Near East. This wasn't just about fancy trinkets. It was about influence and power. The Minoans understood that the key to prosperity was not just in what you could produce, but in what you could procure. The Mycenaeans, ever the opportunists, saw the benefits of this trade system and jumped on board faster than you can say, Linear B. They weren't just passive recipients of Minoan goods. They were active participants in this burgeoning Bronze Age economy. The Mycenaeans expanded their own trade routes, reaching as far as Italy and the Levant. By 1450 BCE, they not only inherited the Minoan trade routes, but also added their own flair, swapping goods like ceramics and olive oil for metals and luxury items. Now, let's be clear. This wasn't just a friendly exchange of goods. There was an underlying tension, a brand rivalry, if you will, akin to the ancient equivalent of Coke versus Pepsi, but with more pottery and fewer jingles. Minoan pottery was the gold standard, light, delicate, and beautifully decorated. Mycenaean pottery, on the other hand, was more robust, suitable for the rough-and-tumble life of mainland Greece. But as they say, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and the Mycenaeans, ever the cultural magpies, began to mimic Minoan styles, creating their own versions that were just different enough to avoid a lawsuit, if such a thing had existed back then. This competition wasn't limited to pottery. Frescoes, those vibrant wall paintings, were another battleground. The Minoans were masters of the fresco, with their naturalistic depictions of flora and fauna. The Mycenaeans, never ones to be outdone, adopted these techniques but added their own twist, often featuring scenes of warfare and hunting alongside the more serene images of nature. It was like they were saying, sure, we can paint a pretty picture, but don't forget, we're warriors at heart. Trade wasn't the only thing the Mycenaeans borrowed. Technology was another area where they engaged in a bit of ancient industrial espionage. The Minoans were renowned for their advanced metalworking, a craft they had honed through their extensive contacts across the Mediterranean. The Mycenaeans took note, adopting and adapting these techniques to produce their own range of bronze weapons and tools. It was a classic case of, if you can't beat M, join M, or in this case, learn from them and then try to outdo them. Speaking of outdoing, the Mycenaeans weren't above a little corporate sabotage. As the Minoan civilization began to falter around 1450 BCE, thanks to a mix of natural disasters and internal strife, the Mycenaeans moved in, not just to fill the power vacuum, but to take over key trade routes and resources. This wasn't mere opportunism, it was strategic brilliance. By capitalizing on the Minoan decline, the Mycenaeans cemented their status as the dominant force in the Aegean. It was an ancient game of risk, where the Mycenaeans played to win. In this cutthroat, economic landscape, even the smallest advantage could make a world of difference. The Mycenaeans understood this, leveraging every opportunity to expand their influence and secure their legacy. They weren't just about survival. They were about thriving in a world where fortunes could change with the wind. But let's not paint the Minoans as hapless victims in this economic drama. They were savvy players in their own right. Even as their influence waned, the legacy of their trade networks and cultural innovations lived on, thanks to the Mycenaeans. It's a testament to the interconnectedness of these ancient societies, where even in competition, there was a degree of mutual benefit. As we unravel this complex tapestry of economic exchange, it's clear that the relationship between the Minoans and Mycenaeans was one of both rivalry and cooperation. Their interactions laid the groundwork for future civilizations, setting the stage for the rise of classical Greece. It's a story of ambition, innovation, and the relentless pursuit of greatness, because even in the Bronze Age, the business of history was booming. So, as we look forward to the next chapter of this ancient saga, remember that the Minoans and Mycenaeans were more than just traders and warriors. They were visionaries who shaped the course of history, their influence echoing through the ages. Stay tuned as we continue to explore their legacy and uncover the secrets of these ancient adventurers. There's more to come in this thrilling tale of cultural exchange and economic intrigue. As we journey through the twilight of these Bronze Age heavyweights, let's dig into the gritty details of their decline, not the sanitized tales perfect for bedtime. First off, the Minoans, those masters of maritime and fresco fanatics, didn't just sail off into the sunset after a successful run. Their decline, around 1450 BCE, wasn't just a case of bad luck or poor planning. Nature, as she often does, threw a volcanic tantrum that would make even the mightiest of gods quiver. The eruption on Thera, modern-day Santorini, was a cataclysmic event, spewing ash and triggering tsunamis that pummeled Crete's northern coast faster than you can say Minoan maritime monopoly. But let's not give the volcano all the credit. Economic downturns played their part too, with trade networks unraveling like an ancient sweater. The Minoans, reliant on their shipping prowess, faced the perfect storm of disrupted trade and natural disaster. As if that wasn't enough, the Mycenaeans, ever the opportunists, swooped in to pick up the pieces, expanding their influence over the Aegean like a Bronze Age Amazon gobbling up smaller startups. The Mycenaeans, however, didn't just waltz off with the spoils of their Minoan predecessors. By 1200 BCE, they too were feeling the heat, literally and metaphorically. This wasn't a simple case of overextension, though their empire did stretch its resources thin. It was a cocktail of climate change, internal strife, and a dash of hubris that saw their downfall. Evidence suggests shifts in climate led to crop failures, and with a population that wasn't keen on a diet of air and sunshine, unrest bubbled beneath the surface. Enter the mysterious sea peoples, that enigmatic group who, like a gang of historical ninjas, wreaked havoc across the Mediterranean. They're the ancient world's wildcard, and while we still debate their origins, they certainly delivered the coup de grace to the Mycenaean civilization. Their raids, along with internal squabbles, contributed to what we now call the Late Bronze Age collapse. Around 1100 BCE, the Mycenaeans, like a rock band past its prime, were no more. But let's not dismiss them with a simple, they lived, they conquered, they fell. The legacy of both the Minoans and Mycenaeans is more than just ruins and pottery shards. It's a testament to human innovation and adaptability. The Mycenaeans, for instance, left behind a linguistic legacy in the form of Linear B, a script that, once deciphered, revealed a detailed view of their bureaucratic genius. It was like cracking open the world's oldest filing cabinet, filled with records of trade, taxation, and administrative orders. This script is the precursor to classical Greek, threading the Mycenaean influence through the very language of Homer and beyond. And let's not forget the architectural marvels. The Cyclopean walls of Mycenae and the grandiose Lion Gate stand as monuments to their engineering prowess. They didn't just build for function, they built for legacy. These structures whispered tales of power and prestige, echoing through centuries to inspire the Greeks of the classical era. In fact, the grandiose palaces of the Mycenaeans, though now in ruins, set the stage for the idea of monumental architecture that would later be perfected in the temples and theatres of Athens. Culturally speaking, the Minoans bequeathed a rich tapestry of artistic and religious motifs that the Mycenaeans, and later the Greeks, would weave into their own societal fabric. From the labyrinthine designs, inspired by Minoan palaces, to the adoption of bull-leaping motifs, these cultural threads persisted, morphing and merging into what we now consider foundational elements of Greek art and mythology. And then there's the myth-making. The tales of the Minotaur, Theseus, and the labyrinth didn't fade with the Minoans' decline. They became richer, transformed by the Greeks into epic stories that would resonate down the ages. This mythological inheritance is like the world's most elaborate game of telephone, where each retelling adds a layer of drama and mystery. The Mycenaeans themselves became the stuff of legend, their exploits woven into the fabric of tales like the Iliad and the Odyssey. These stories, while rooted in history, became foundational myths that shaped Greek identity. So, what do we learn from the rise and fall of these ancient titans? First, that civilizations are as fragile as they are formidable. A single volcanic eruption or a shift in the winds of trade can topple even the mightiest. Second, that legacy isn't just about what you build in your lifetime. It's about the stories that endure, the innovations that inspire, and the cultures that carry your influence into the future. In the end, the Minoans and Mycenaeans remind us that history isn't just a series of dates and events, but a living tapestry of human experience. Their tales are cautionary yet inspiring, a testament to both the power and the vulnerability inherent in all great civilizations. As we close this chapter, remember, the echoes of these ancient cultures still whisper to us, urging us to learn from their triumphs and their downfalls. They've left behind a legacy that's far more than just stone and script. It's the very essence of what it means to be human, striving for greatness against the odds. The sound of a rooster crowing might be your medieval alarm clock, but forget about hitting snooze. Today, you're diving into the world of medieval English blacksmithing, a place where fire and iron are your bread and butter, not just a Metallica song. The sun peeks over the horizon, casting long shadows across the village as you stretch and prepare for a day that's anything but leisurely. In the heart of the village, the blacksmith's workshop stands as a testament to the community's backbone, the place where practicality meets a hint of artistry, and where a man's worth can be measured in hammer strikes. As you make your way to the forge, you might notice the clamor of daily life starting up. The blacksmith shop isn't just a place to make horseshoes and plows. It's the medieval version of a multitasking hub. It's your village answer to the mall, the mechanic, and the hardware store rolled into one. Now, if you're expecting a lone blacksmith, rugged and stoic, think again. This isn't some Hollywood set where one man shapes the destiny of an entire town with a single, defiant hammer blow. No, it's a bustling hive of activity, with apprentices, journeymen, and maybe even a master smith overseeing the controlled chaos. Your first task is to familiarize yourself with the tools of the trade. The anvil, the bellows, the hammer, these are your bread and butter. The anvil itself, weighing in at a hefty 100 to 150 pounds, is the centerpiece of your operation. It's as solid and unyielding as your landlord's demands for rent. The bellows, those big, lung-like contraptions, are your forge's best friend, puffing air into the fire to keep it hot enough to melt iron. Without them, you'd be trying to work with a campfire, and let's face it, s'mores aren't going to cut it when you're crafting a sword. Speaking of iron, let's talk materials. You see, iron isn't just lying around like rocks on the ground. It's expensive. In the 14th century, a ton of iron might cost you around 40 shillings. Meanwhile, charcoal, your forge's fuel, doesn't come cheap either. It's another reminder that every strike of the hammer counts. Waste a piece of iron, and you might as well toss a few coins into the fire for good measure. Now, forget any notions of the blacksmith as a lone wolf. This shop is more akin to a medieval co-working space. You might start your journey here as an apprentice, a gig you'd probably land at the tender age of 12 or so. Not ready for the school of hard knocks. Too bad. This apprenticeship is your ticket to mastering the art of blacksmithing. Over the next 7 years, you'll learn everything from fire management to metallurgy. In exchange, you get room, board, and the privilege of working until your arms feel like they've been tenderized for dinner. Let's bust another myth while we're at it. Blacksmiths didn't just make weapons and armor, though that part is romantic enough for a bard's song. Your average day could involve crafting tools, horseshoes, nails, and anything else the village needed to keep chugging along. It's a job that requires versatility, and more importantly, a strong back. There's little glamour in making a plowshare, but when it helps feed a village, you're basically the medieval version of a rock star. As the day unfolds, you might catch snippets of village gossip. Perhaps the lord of the manor needs a new set of tools for his burgeoning fields, or maybe there's talk of a festival where your skills will be on full display. Whatever the case, the blacksmith isn't just a tradesman. He's a linchpin in the economy. Without him, the village might as well curl up and sleep through the winter. But let's not get too misty-eyed about it. Blacksmithing is hard work, and the economic realities reflect that. You're not paid in gold coins raining from the heavens. Rather, you're compensated based on the work you do. A nail might fetch you a pittance, while a well-crafted sword could pay for a month's worth of food. It's feast or famine, and the scales are always tipping. As the sun climbs higher, the rhythmic clang of hammers fills the air. Each strike is a testament to your skill, your patience, and your endurance. By the time the afternoon sun begins to wane, you might find yourself coated in sweat and grime, but there's a satisfaction in it, a sense that you're more than just a cog in a machine. You're the heartbeat of this community, the unsung hero whose work paves the way for others. So, as you stoke the fire one last time, think about the stories these walls could tell. They're not just of swords and armor, but of everyday tools that helped carve out a living in a world that demanded resilience and grit. And as you hang up your apron and step into the cool evening air, you can rest easy knowing that tomorrow will bring another chance to shape the world, one hammer strike at a time. As you hang up your apron and step into the cool evening air, you can feel the satisfaction of a hard day's work, but don't get too comfortable. Tomorrow the forge will roar back to life, and you'll be right there, sweating it out like a medieval rock star. But before tomorrow dawns, let's get into the real nitty-gritty of blacksmithing. No, it's not all about glamorous sword-making. It's about precision and practicality, where the smallest misstep can turn a tool into a useless hunk of metal. Let's start with the daily grind. Literally. If you think pounding out a sword is the blacksmith's bread and butter, think again. Your day might begin with the more mundane, yet vital task of horseshoeing. Yeah, it's not as romantic as forging Excalibur, but without you, the local lord's prize stallion isn't going anywhere. Shoeing a horse might sound straightforward, but it's a delicate procedure, part orthopedic surgeon, part farrier. One wrong move, and your customer might be clumping around like they're wearing lead boots. Now, onto the precision work. Whether it's crafting plows or fixing a broken hinge, every task demands your full attention. It's a bit like juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle, except the swords are red-hot chunks of iron, and the unicycle is your medieval workshop filled with glowing embers and heavy tools. Fun times, right? But that's the life of a blacksmith, balancing creativity with practicality. You're the unsung hero ensuring the village doesn't collapse into chaos or starvation. And about the precision required, let's talk metallurgy. This isn't some slapdash operation where you bang on metal until it looks vaguely tool-like. You're working with wrought iron, a material that's both your best friend and worst enemy. Heat it too much, and it becomes brittle, too little, and it won't bend. It's a dance, a fiery tango with a stubborn partner, and each step has to be in perfect time, or you're back to square one. So why does all this matter? Simple. A good tool can be the difference between a bountiful harvest and famine. Your plows, sickles, and scythes are the backbone of medieval agriculture. Without them, the village fields might as well be barren wastelands. And when it comes to warfare, because let's face it, medieval times weren't exactly peaceful, your skill in crafting weapons is what keeps the local militia from being overrun by invaders. Sure, the knights in shining armor get all the glory, but without your handiwork, they'd be charging into battle with sticks and harsh language. But let's not get carried away with the romantic notion of the blacksmith as the village savior. There's plenty of soot and sweat involved, and not the glamorous kind. We're talking coal dust in your lungs and burns on your arms. Forget any notion of pristine workspaces. Your shop is a gritty, grimy testament to hard labor. And you, the blacksmith, are the embodiment of resilience, facing down the elements with nothing but grit and a hammer. Now, while we're debunking myths, let's address the idea of blacksmiths as solitary artisans. Sure, there's a certain rugged individualism to the profession, but the truth is more collaborative. Remember those apprentices and journeymen. They're not just decorative. They're the ones keeping the fire stoked and the anvils ringing. It's teamwork, medieval style, and without it, you'd be up to your elbows in unfinished work. Speaking of teamwork, let's give a nod to the economic realities that shaped your day-to-day. Blacksmith wasn't just paid in goodwill and gratitude. Your livelihood depended on the village economy. A lean harvest or a poor trade season meant fewer jobs and less coin in your pouch. It's a precarious balance, one where your skills are both a safety net and a gamble. Fail to deliver, and you're out of the frying pan and into the fire, quite literally if your forge decides to go up in smoke. And yet, despite the challenges, there's a certain romance to the life of a blacksmith, not the kind of romance that sells novels, but the kind that fuels determination. Each piece you craft, from the humblest nail to the mightiest sword, is a testament to your skill and endurance. The village might not sing your praises every day, but they rely on you like the seasons rely on the sun. Without your contributions, the medieval world would grind to a halt, stuck in the mud with broken wheels and unshod horses. As the night settles over the village, the forge rests silent and waiting. Tomorrow you'll return to its heat and hammer, ready to shape the future with each strike. Because in this medieval dance of fire and iron, you're not just surviving, you're thriving. And that, my friend, is the real legacy of the blacksmith. As the night settles over the village, the forge rests, silent and waiting. Tomorrow you'll return to its heat and hammer, ready to shape the future with each strike. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before we leap into tomorrow, let's chew over what happens after your midday meal. The village market is in full swing, and your products are undeniably the stars of the show. Picture this, a bustling medieval bazaar, where the clang of your hammer echoes amidst the chatter and barter. Here, you're not just a blacksmith. You're the medieval equivalent of Amazon Prime, supplying essentials that keep the village ticking. But before you bask in the glory, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of how you fit into this grand economic tapestry. Back in medieval England, the economy was less about Wall Street and more about cobblestones and market stalls. Your forge was the engine room of commerce, producing goods that were as vital as they were varied. From horseshoes to hinges, your wares weren't just products. They were the foundation of everyday life. But don't get carried away with visions of medieval opulence. While your work was indispensable, it didn't automatically translate into riches. You were more likely to be paid in sacks of grain than sacks of gold coins. And speaking of trade, let's talk about barter. In a world where coins were as rare as a dragon's tooth, bartering was the order of the day. You might trade a set of horseshoes for a bushel of wheat or a plowshare for a side of beef. It wasn't a perfect system, but it kept the wheels of commerce turning. You see, in this pre-credit card era, your products were your currency, and every transaction was a negotiation. Forget about eBay or Craigslist. Your bargaining skills were honed at the forge, where every deal was a testament to your craftsmanship and haggling prowess. Now, about your social status. While your arms were busy swinging hammers, your reputation was swinging your social standing. In the village hierarchy, you weren't the top dog, but you weren't the runt of the litter either. Your economic influence gave you a seat at the table, even if it was the wobbly one in the corner. Sure, you weren't rolling in dough like the local lord, but your skills gave you a certain clout. You were the guy people turned to when they needed something done right, the unsung hero whose work kept the village from grinding to a halt. But let's not romanticize it too much. Myth of the wealthy blacksmith is just that, a myth. Sure, you might strike it lucky with a lucrative commission now and then, like when a noble needed a new suit of armor for the next jousting tournament. But more often than not, you were hustling just to keep the forge fires burning. Your earnings were as unpredictable as the English weather, with good times and bad rolling like the tides. And while we're debunking myths, let's talk about the supposed glamour of working with fire and iron. Yes, there's a certain gritty appeal to it, but reality checks abound. Your daily grind was exactly that, a grind. The soot and sweat weren't just dramatic effects. They were the harsh realities of a job that was as demanding as it was essential. You were the linchpin of the local economy, but that didn't come with a cushy corner office or a golden parachute. So why stick with it? Simple. Despite the soot and sweat, there was a certain satisfaction in knowing that your work mattered. Each piece you crafted was a small but crucial part of the community's survival. You were the backbone of the local economy, the guy who made sure the plows were sharp and the horses were shod. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and it was necessary. In this medieval dance of trade and commerce, you were more than just a blacksmith. You were a vital cog in a complex machine, and your work was woven into the very fabric of daily life. So as you pack up your tools and head home for the night, remember this. While the world may not sing your praises, your contributions are as enduring as the iron you shape. Tomorrow, you'll return to the forge, ready to continue your role as the village's unsung hero. Until then, enjoy the cool evening air and the knowledge that even in the humdrum of history, you were a key player. As you soak in that cool evening breeze, let's dive into the intrigue of medieval blacksmithing's social and political landscape. Trust me, it's a saga worthy of a Netflix binge. Picture yourself not just as a village craftsman, but as a pawn in a grand chess game, where power dynamics played out over the clanging of anvils and the smoke of 1,000 forges. First, let's talk guilds. Think of them as medieval trade unions, but with more ceremonial robes and fewer coffee breaks. By the 12th century, blacksmiths across England were part of these guilds, organizations that were as much about politics as they were about perfecting the art of hammering metal. They set the rules, decided who could join the ranks, and importantly, controlled the quality and price of the goods. You couldn't just waltz into town and start pounding out horseshoes without their blessing. Joining a guild wasn't a walk in the park, either. You started as an apprentice, basically the medieval equivalent of an unpaid intern, minus the Starbucks runs. After years of toil, you'd graduate to a journeyman, finally earning a wage and some semblance of respect. But to become a master, that was the holy grail. You'd need to create a masterpiece, an original work that showed off your skills, sort of like the world's oldest talent show. If the guild gave you the thumbs up, you could open your own shop, and maybe even take on apprentices of your own. Being part of a guild had its perks, no doubt. It provided community, protection, and a network of like-minded artisans. But it also came with strings attached, like a medieval HOA, complete with dues and the occasional power struggle. You see, guilds had significant clout, often rubbing shoulders with royal courts and local lords. That meant politics was part and parcel of your anvil-banging days. If the local lord needed weapons for a skirmish, guess who he was calling? Your guild, And by extension, you speaking of politics, let's not forget the taxes. The crown, ever hungry for gold to fund its wars and lavish banquets, saw tradesmen as a reliable piggy bank. Various taxes, like the hearth tax or the infamous Peter's pence, could make your head spin faster than a blacksmith's wheel. And while your average lord might have been content with a cut of your profits in exchange for protection, the crown had no qualms about squeezing every last penny from your soot-stained fingers. These financial pressures meant that blacksmiths weren't just artisans, they were economic strategists. Every piece of iron was potential income, but also potential tax. You had to weigh the cost of materials, the guild's demands, and the crown's taxes against the price your wares could fetch. It was a balancing act worthy of Cirque du Soleil, with failure meaning more than just an empty coin pouch. It could mean losing your forge or worse, your freedom. But enough doom and gloom, let's touch on the community's perception. Were you revered or reviled? In truth, it was a bit of both. On one hand, you were the keystone of village life, crafting the tools that kept fields tilled and armies armed. On the other, you were a tradesman, often seen as beneath the landed gentry. But here's the kicker. In many ways, your importance transcended social hierarchy. When winter loomed and the harvest failed, it wasn't the lord who saved the village, but the blacksmith who forged the plows and blades that renewed hope and sustenance. In a world where status was often inherited, your skill could elevate you in unexpected ways. Sure, you might not dine with the king, but in your village, your work spoke louder than titles. People respected your craft because, quite simply, they couldn't live without it. And while your status might not have been gilded in gold, it was forged in the iron of necessity, a currency far more enduring than any coin. So there you have it. A day in the life of a medieval blacksmith was more than just fire and metal. It was a complex dance of skill, survival, and social navigation. As you head back to your humble abode, know that the clang of your hammer was more than just noise. It was the sound of history being shaped, one heated strike at a time. As the night wraps the village in its starry cloak, let's unravel the tale of how blacksmiths transitioned from medieval mainstays to modern marvels. We've covered the day-to-day grind, the guild politics, and the economic gymnastics that made a blacksmith's life a high-wire act without the safety net. But what happened when the wheel of history turned, and the clanging of hammers met the hum of the Industrial Revolution? Let's jump into the 18th century, when the world was on the brink of change that would make your head spin faster than an unbalanced wagon wheel. This period wasn't just about powdered wigs and fancy waistcoats. It was about innovation. The Industrial Revolution came barreling through like a steam-powered locomotive, and blacksmiths were right there on the tracks. Suddenly, the skills honed over centuries were being challenged by machines that could churn out nails faster than you could say anvil. Take the Bessemer process, for instance, introduced in the 1850. It was the first inexpensive industrial process for the mass production of steel, revolutionizing the materials game. Where iron was once king, steel came in as the usurper, offering strength and versatility far beyond its predecessor. For blacksmiths, this wasn't just a new material, it was a new world. The Bessemer process could produce 5 tons of steel in just half an hour, a task that would have taken a traditional forge weeks, if not months. And then there was the steam engine, a beast of a machine that redefined labor. No longer was everything done by the sweat of your brow and the strength of your arm. Machines powered by steam could do the heavy lifting, quite literally. This meant that the blacksmith's role began to evolve from a manual laborer to a machine operator, a shift as dramatic as turning a plowshare into a sword. Now, don't get me wrong, this wasn't the end of the blacksmith. Far from it. The role just adapted, much like a blacksmith would adapt iron to fit a need. As technology advanced, so did the blacksmith's toolkit. They began working alongside engineers, contributing to the development of railways, ships, and the burgeoning industrial landscape. In fact, during the 19th century, blacksmiths found themselves at the heart of the rail industry, crafting the iron parts that kept trains on track, and ironically, keeping the wheels of progress turning. But let's address the elephant in the room, the romantic image of the blacksmith. Despite these advancements, our cultural imagination still clings to the medieval ideal, the lone craftsman, hammer in hand, shaping iron in a dusty village forge. It's an image so romanticized that it could star in its own period drama. Yet this nostalgia overlooks the reality that blacksmithing, like any trade, had to evolve or die. This brings us to the present. Today, blacksmithing is experiencing something of a renaissance, not out of necessity, but out of choice. In a world dominated by mass production, there's a growing appreciation for handmade goods. Modern blacksmiths, often called artisan blacksmiths, have reclaimed the anvil, not as a necessity, but as an art form. They embrace traditional techniques while incorporating modern tools, producing everything from bespoke knives to decorative metalwork. In many ways, the blacksmith's legacy is a testament to humanity's ability to adapt and innovate. The anvil may no longer be the center of economic survival, but it remains a powerful symbol of resilience and creativity. The skills honed over centuries are now celebrated in craft shows, workshops, and even reality TV competitions, proof that the fire of blacksmithing still burns bright. So, what does all this mean for our understanding of history and craftsmanship today? For one, it reminds us that while technology changes, the human drive to create and adapt remains constant. The blacksmith's journey from medieval necessity to modern artistry is a microcosm of our own history of innovation and change. It's a story of survival, adaptation, and the enduring power of craftsmanship. As we close this chapter on medieval blacksmithing, take a moment to appreciate the echoes of the past in the clang of a modern hammer. The legacy of the blacksmith is more than just a tale of fire and iron. It's the story of humanity's unyielding spirit to forge ahead, no matter how the world changes. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth celebrating, one hammer strike at a time.